What's going on, my Godzilla guys and gals? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is going to be an ultimate breakdown for all of the recent Godzilla movies. We know that you guys like convenience, so we decided to put all of our recent Godzilla Monsterverse breakdowns into one mega breakdown for your viewing convenience. So sit back, relax, and let's just get into this thing. Because this is going to be a breakdown of the Godzilla movie from 2014, a whole decade ago. Can y'all believe that? Like, that was the year that I graduated college and began my life of crippling debt. Good times. But anyways, let's make like Godzilla and take a big old bite into this monster of a breakdown, shall we? But yo, listen, real quick, Godzilla's like super powerful with his atomic breath, right? But did you know that you, yes you, have a special power all of your own as well? Right at your fingertips too, and that power is the power to make me and Paul's day by using your finger to tap that like and subscribe button. Every like goes a long way to letting YouTube know that you love what we do here, and we always appreciate it. But anyways, the Godzilla movie opens up with what appears to be an early cave wall drawing depicting Godzilla himself, as the creature in this image was drawn with Godzilla's very scaly back. Then immediately following this is ancient imagery of what appears to be a group of Christian men doing some sort of ceremony on the back of a giant fish. This is actually art depicting the storied journey of the Irish saint Brendan the Navigator, and how during his 7-year journey across the ocean, a giant whale would show up every year at Easter to allow Brendan and his Christian homies to perform a whole mass on its back. So, needless to say, whoever wrote that story is very likely no stranger to magic mushrooms. After this, we can see a drawing of the Ichthyosaurus fossil, the reptilian species of lizard that this intro implies that Godzilla possibly evolved from, with the name Ichthyosaurus quite literally meaning fish lizard. Then flashes of Charles Darwin's On the Origins of Species appear, which is of course the famous book published by Darwin that included his revolutionary research on the concept of species evolution. This is then followed by an ancient artwork of Heracles fighting the mythical Keto sea serpent, heavily implying here that past sightings of Godzilla's evolving fish lizard species could have inspired some truth behind those legends. And this opening also seemingly implies that Godzilla or one of his species were responsible for the 1898 sinking of the USS Maine warship, an event that would inevitably lead to the 10-week Spanish-American War. Then we see reports of a separate American military submarine carrying 25 people sinking on the western coast, only for that submarine to be rediscovered later, with the government denying that they had other submarines unaccounted for, which definitely feels like Monarch trying to cover up Kaiju's continued feeding on the nuclear arsenals of navies across the world. In this Godzilla 2014 movie, we can see just how far a Kaiju can toss a warship when the US military catches a MUTO eating all of that spicy radiation inside of nuclear missiles from a missing Russian warship. Then after this, we get a quote about Godzilla from paleontologist Harry S. Ladd that calls his species a species of reptile that we thought was extinct. This animal did not die from any event. It is alive in the Pacific, with the words "destroy the creature" at the bottom, accompanied by a picture of this Harry Ladd fellow looking downwards. Harry S. Ladd was a real-life scientist who was famous for studying fossils in the Pacific, but in the Monsterverse, he did a little bit more than dig for bones. He apparently was one of Monarch's most crucial leaders and assets, alongside a Dr. Leonard Schultz and Commander Roger Revel, shortly after the organization started to really take off. Harry S. Ladd was exceptionally familiar with the geology of the Bikini Atoll Islands, which also get referenced a number of times during this opening, as the real-life nuclear tests conducted on those islands gave the creators of the Monsterverse much creative inspiration, as we learn in this movie that the nuclear explosions at Bikini Atoll weren't actual nuclear tests at all, but a secret attempt by multinational entities to destroy Godzilla completely. And while this intro does give us a few flashes of imagery from this event, Apple TV's recent Monarch Legacy of Monsters series gives us a front row seat to this very attempt to murder Godzilla and the messed up military politics that led to that decision. But anyways, right after we get this quote from Ladd, we see what appears to be a military communication that references the deputy director of Monarch at the time, and how that deputy director strongly suggests that the eradication of Godzilla is not only a matter of national security, but that of the entire planet, with the deputy director of Monarch possibly referring to Lee Shaw of Monarch Legacy of Monsters, specifically when he informs General Puckett that the atomic atomic explosion at Bikini Atoll did not kill Godzilla at all. Then after this, we get this frame of a map of Japan next to this piece of quickly redacted text meant to highlight Bryan Cranston's name. But before it's redacted, the text says, Walter Malcolm has claimed that government men dressed in white lab coats routinely appear at the site, and shortly after the event, all residents are sworn to silence. The name Walter Malcolm appears to have been made as a reference to Bryan Cranston's iconic roles as Breaking Bad's Walter White and Hal from Malcolm in the Middle. Then later we get a paragraph of text that references the biblical passages of Job 41, Psalm 74:14, and Isaiah 27, as each of these passages reference the mythical Leviathan sea serpent, connecting Godzilla to yet another culture's folklore. This is next to an image of the Argonne National Laboratory at Palos Park, a laboratory built as a result of the Manhattan Project that was eventually tasked with producing peaceful nuclear energy solutions for the world. The Palos Park unit, also known as Site A, was the site in the Argonne Forest where the world's first nuclear reactor, Chicago Pile 1, was reconstructed to make a new nuclear reactor called Chicago Pile 2. Then after we get old film imagery with the text Project Monarch on it, we get a plaque commemorating the world's first nuclear bomb explosion at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, the precursor to the eventual bombing of Hiroshima, Japan by the United States, an event that we learn later has deeply scarred Dr. Serizawa. Then, after we get footage of soldiers and scientists gearing up to explode their secret Godzilla nuke as the soon-to-be irradiated people of Bikini Atoll watch, the opening credits end with that same anti-Godzilla nuke exploding, leaving a rain of nuclear ash as the Godzilla title appears. Having been released on May 16th, 2014, this movie's release coincides with the Godzilla franchise's 60th birth year, as the original Godzilla film was released on October 27th, 1954. With the film only needing $380 million to break even, Godzilla 2014 would end up raking in around $529 million, making it a surefire box office success and a strong start to Legendary's baby Monsterverse. The positive response to this movie would of course help Gareth Edwards score his chance at directing his own Star Wars film 2 years later with 2016's Rogue One. Inspired very much by the slow, suspenseful build-up that made the 1975 thriller Jaws such a beloved and terrifying classic, Gareth Edwards emulated a lot of that tone with how he introduces the kaiju of this film, with Godzilla not really making an appearance until around the 59-minute mark of the movie. And Jaws' influence is also where the Brody family gets their name from, as the main character of Jaws is Police Chief Martin Brody. Speaking of Godzilla, at one point, the movie was going to show Godzilla emerge out of some ice in a Siberian glacier at one point. However, because the 2013 Superman movie Man of Steel recently came out with a glacier scene that was very close to their own idea, that imagery was ultimately scrapped. But anyways, moving on, the film then brings us to the year 1999 as we watch Ishiro Serizawa and his partner Vivian Graham arrive at a Universal Western mining site. Ishiro Serizawa is of course played by iconic actor Ken Watanabe, with the character's name being a mashup of two different names: 1954 Godzilla director Ishiro Honda, as well as Godzilla 54 character Dr. Daisuke Serizawa. But anyways, at this mining site, miners who thought they struck at a uranium deposit accidentally find the underground tomb of a dead member of Godzilla's species, along with the eggs of the bad kaiju of this movie, with the male MUTO of this species having hatched first and creating a trail of dirt leading to the ocean, where that kaiju would swim or otherwise use some hollow earth portals to make their way on over to the fictional city of Genjira, Japan, in order to feed off of the radiation from their nuclear reactors as they continued their metamorphosis into the winged MUTO that would hatch in front of both Brody men 15 years later. Not only did that cocoon cause the meltdown at the Genjira power plant that would eventually claim the life of Sandra Brody in 1999, but that very same cocoon hatching would of course lead to the eventual demise of Ford's father Joseph as well. So it's kind of crazy how just one mining expedition could domino in such a crazy way. But Ford would of course get his revenge on these MUTOs by murdering a bunch of MUTO babies by the end of the film. You kill my parents, I kill your kids. It's the circle of life, or something like that. It's been a while since I've watched Lion King. Throughout the movie, these winged kaiju species that Godzilla would face were never actually given a proper name. They're only referred to as MUTO, with MUTO of course meaning massive unidentified terrestrial organism, and not actually the name of a particular species of kaiju. Like, it literally would not be until 2019's Godzilla Aftershock comic that this species of kaiju were given the proper name Titanus jinshinmushi, with jinshinmushi meaning earthquake beetle. This insectoid species of kaiju were directly responsible for the near extinction of Godzilla's kind, with Godzilla being heavily implied to be the very last of his species. This is because these jinshinmushi bugs made a habit of reproducing by hunting down Godzilla's species and laying eggs inside of their dead bodies, which is pretty hardcore. They do this in order for their babies to have a plethora of radioactive meat to feed on right after they hatch, the aftermath of which Dr. Sarazawa and Graham witnessed in the Philippines as they stood amongst the fossilized remains of one of Godzilla's species. But anyways, when we first meet the Brody family in 1999 Genjira, Japan, we see a young Ford excitedly hop out of his bed to celebrate his father's birthday. However, when he does, we very much see an interesting set of plastic foreshadowing on the ground. Ford's toys appear to not only tease Ford's future as a soldier in the US Armed Forces, but it also foreshadows the night of his father's death, as a toy dinosaur can be seen amongst army jeeps and a helicopter, all of which were present when the United States Army tried to save Joseph Broly's life during their military helicopter ride to the USS Saratoga. As a young Ford drags his father's happy birthday banner on the ground past his army and dinosaur toys, we can see that Ford also has a bit of an interest in outer space, as a toy Saturn V rocket can be seen on the ground as well. This rocket could also be seen as a piece of Ford foreshadowing, as it very much resembles the missile that Ford escorts with the military on the West Coast later on in the film. Behind this rocket, a Japanese monster film poster can be seen featuring a kaiju that looks very similar to the main big butterfly bug baddies that Godzilla has to exterminate later on in this movie. As young Ford sneaks a peek at his distressed father on the phone, you can see a family photo of them all on his computer desk, that very same photo that Joseph would later find 15 years later in the wreckage of the quarantined Genjira. And speaking of Genjira, fun fact, the power plant that the Brodies work at in the following scene was originally going to be set in the real-world island of Hokkaido, Japan, in an earlier version of the script, but the team opted to have this catastrophe occur in a fictional city instead. When that catastrophe happens, a young Ford Brody witnesses the destruction of the Genjira power plant from his classroom, rudely interrupting his teacher's lesson on moth metamorphosis, a clear reference to Mothra from the original Godzilla films. As Ford looks through his classroom window, a dinosaur skeleton can be seen below a red paper bird hanging from the ceiling, a possible reference to both Godzilla and Rodan respectively. Then we quickly transition to the year 2014, where we meet a Ford aged up 15 years to be played by actor Aaron Taylor Johnson. And while Aaron Taylor Johnson was indeed director Gareth Edwards' first choice, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Scoot McNairy, Caleb Landry Jones, and Henry Cavill were all considered at one point for the role of adult Ford Brody. But anyways, after Ford gets home after being deployed as an explosive ordnance disposal specialist, we see him reunite with his son, who has made him a special banner, much like Ford did for his own dad. And while Ford tucks his son to sleep, we can see in the background that his son has drawn him a picture of Ford on a boat, because Ford Brody himself was of course part of the United States Navy. And then after this, we all have the displeasure of having to watch Pietro make out with his sister Wanda Maximoff in a Stafford University shirt, which is so weird in a post-Age of Ultron world. But hey, this was pre-Age of Ultron, so I guess it's fine. I don't know. With some Game of Thrones shit, man. Then the scene quickly shifts to Tokyo, Japan, when Ford has to pick his father up from jail. And when they get back to Joe's messy-ass apartment, Ford cannot help but notice all the newspaper articles and conspiracies that cover his father's walls, with one of those articles even correctly guessing that the Bikini Atoll nuclear explosions weren't your average nuclear tests, and were actually cover-ups for something much bigger. And seeing all of this craziness, Ford makes a desperate plea for his father to stop, but Joe refuses because he feels immense guilt for being the one who sent his wife Sandra to die, and wants to prove that the Genjira meltdown was more than just some freak accident. But when he talks about his wife, notice how we see Joe's reflection of his own face in the window, very much harkening back to when Joe had to look through that sealed door window to watch his wife take her last breaths. This of course convinces Ford to join his father in entering the bogus Genjira quarantine zone to get back to their old house. As Ford makes his way through his old messed up room, the word Mothra can be seen written on one of his old moth tanks. Ford didn't actually write the word Mothra on the tank, but instead wrote the words Dad's Moth on a piece of tape. And that tape covered over another word that ended in R-A. So the dirtiness of the room made that labeling look like Mothra. Another fun Mothra nod by the set design team. Then after this, Ford and his father are arrested in the quarantine zone and brought to the wreckage of the Genjira power plant just in time for the butterfly-inspired male MUTO to pop out of his cocoon and murder a bunch of people, including Ford's dad, Mr. Bryan Cranston himself. And also, random fun fact about Bryan Cranston, dude has loved monsters seemingly his entire life. So much so that Bryan Cranston was actually the voice of Snizzard and the Twin Man, two of Rita's monsters in the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers show. Billy Cranston, the blue Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, takes his last name from Mr. Bryan Cranston himself. And his involvement in the show is primarily why he was chosen to play Zordon in the 2017 Power Rangers movie. So needless to say, I'm sure Bryan Cranston was amped to be involved in this Godzilla production despite his character suffering a pretty early death. And yo, speaking of giant robots fighting monsters, if he didn't already have his hands full with directing Pacific Rim at the time, Guillermo del Toro was actually heavily considered to direct this film before Gareth Edwards was brought on board, which is kind of crazy. But I'm glad things happened the way they did because we got two dope monster movies from Legendary instead of just one. And God, do I hope that these two franchises cross over one day because we need to see it. I want to see Godzilla team up with a team of Jaegers, man. Let's make it happen. And call Guillermo del Toro to come back and make another good Pacific Rim film because that last one, not for me. But do you know what else was considered? A cameo from Mr. Akira Takarada, one of the original actors from the classic Godzilla films who has made a number of cameos in past Godzilla movies. A scene with Takarada was filmed where he would play an immigration officer at an airport that interacts with Ford, but unfortunately that scene would be deleted. Takarada's death in 2022 made this deleted scene Takarada's last ever appearance in a Godzilla film. Rest in peace, King. But anyways, Ford is of course brought to the USS Saratoga, where he is briefed by Monarch and the US military about the origins of Monarch and humanity's history with kaiju, with Doctors Serizawa and Graham revealing that the event that specifically first woke Godzilla up in the Monsterverse was the submerging of the USS Nautilus submarine, which was actually the world's first ever nuclear-powered submarine. As soon as that radioactive ship went deep underwater in 1945, Godzilla's nostrils got a tingling and that big-ass amphibious reptile woke the hell up. Then after Ford tells Monarch and the military that his father was tracking echolocation patterns, Ford is then sent to Honolulu, Hawaii in order to catch a flight back to San Francisco, only for Godzilla himself to make his first ever appearance on the world stage when he detects the presence of the male MUTO munching on some Russian nukes like they were some Taki chips, weighing a whopping 90,000 tons and standing at 355 feet. There is a reason why this Godzilla is the king of monsters in Legendary's Monsterverse. He was literally the biggest Godzilla ever made, with the original Godzilla and the new Godzilla from Godzilla -1 both standing at 164 feet. And to design Godzilla's face to be as commanding as possible, the visual effects department apparently used the faces of Komodo dragons, bears, dogs, and eagles in order to get it all just right. But anyways, right after Godzilla makes a big scream on TV, Ford's son Sam wakes up from a long night of playing with his own toy dinosaurs in his living room, much like his dad did when he was young. He then tells his mom to check out the real dinosaur on TV because frankly, that dinosaur was doing some pretty rad shit at an airport, and he didn't want Wanda to miss it. But anyways, after Reptar and the big butterfly yell at each other for a bit, the male MUTO bugs off to go find his girlfriend slash sister, a very pregnant sister girlfriend who just hatched in Nevada. Serizawa and Graham correctly predict that these MUTOs would hit America's stash of nuclear materials in the Yucca Mountains, right on the border of California, with the pregnant MUTO that hit that stash being seen fleeing the scene as she walks over a number of Las Vegas landmarks like Caesar's Palace and Harrah's Casino. And right after this, images of that same kaiju destroying the half-scale replica of the Eiffel Tower at the Paris Las Vegas Casino can be seen on one of Monarch's TVs. Then after this, Godzilla makes his big appearance on mainland America as he ascends onto the panicked drivers of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, California. And fun fact, Gareth Edwards actually had a full 400-foot replica of the Golden Gate Bridge built for this sequence, which is crazy dope. This destruction of the Golden Gate Bridge by Godzilla was a significant moment in Legendary's Monsterverse, especially in Monarch Legacy of Monsters. In that show, we learned that Kate Randa, the granddaughter of Monarch founder William Randa, was traumatized after a school bus full of her students plunged into the ocean as a result of Reptar's rampage. But anyways, in order to retrieve a nuclear warhead stolen by the male MUTO, Brody and a team of army personnel perform a halo jump to descend onto San Francisco, with halo of course standing for high altitude, low opening. But what's super dope about this moment is that while a good amount of this scene does have CG elements, they actually did film real skydivers diving from a plane intercut with studio captured imagery. Gareth Edwards purposely made this moment ultra eerie, suspenseful, and foreboding because he wanted it to feel like angels descending into hell, while citing Dante's Inferno as a bit of inspiration for him. And after they land, the military is able to retrieve the warhead while Ford stays behind to blow up the MUTO eggs. I really loved how Gareth Edwards included the female MUTO crying out in pain at the sight of her charred, destroyed eggs, as it really made these monsters truly feel like animals just trying to survive, as opposed to, you know, malicious titans purposely trying to ruin humanity. As Ford flees from the wrath of a pissed off MUTO, he hops into a boat called Go Whale Tours, with the name Go Whale being a nod to Godzilla, as Godzilla's Japanese name Gojira literally means gorilla whale, so Go Whale is definitely a nod to that. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of 2014's Godzilla film. What an amazing way to kick off such a great Monsterverse, man. Like, I freaking love this movie, man. Like, Gareth Edwards should definitely come back to direct another one of these things. Anyways, Kong Skull Island was directed by Jordan Vogt-Roberts and released on March 10th, 2017, and was the first King Kong movie since Peter Jackson's beloved 2005 King Kong, which meant that Kong Skull Island had some pretty dang big gorilla footprints to fill in, but that was a challenge that Jordan Vogt-Roberts and his team were more than willing to tackle with a 1970s flair. While Vogt-Roberts very much appreciated the original 1933 King Kong film, he wanted to introduce a completely new kind of Kong in his own unique way that nobody had really seen before, and Jordan Vogt-Roberts thought the best way to do this was by giving Kong Skull Island a 1973 setting, heavily wrapped within themes of the Vietnam War, a war that plays a significant role within the plot of this film, as Jordan Vogt-Roberts was heavily inspired by Francis Coppola's 1979 Vietnam War film Apocalypse Now. Like, Kong Skull Island is just straight up Apocalypse Now with a tall-ass Donkey Kong if you think about it, with Skull Island itself being a narrative parallel to the country of Vietnam. And it's a big reason why the director chose to actually film in Vietnam, with the majority of the cast being absolutely amazed as to how beautiful the country of Vietnam actually was. The IMAX poster for Kong Skull Island was actually a direct tribute to Apocalypse Now as well. But before Vogt-Roberts got involved with the film, the original script was actually set almost 60 years prior in the year 1917. But anyways, let us talk about the absolutely genius way this movie starts off by having a young Hank Marlowe falling downwards from the sky, because this opening perfectly encapsulates a major theme of this movie, the metaphorical dangers of flying too damn close to the sun, as originally detailed in the ancient Greek tragedy of Icarus. Colonel Packard actually references the tale of Icarus early on in the movie as his fleet of helicopters first approach Skull Island. For those of you who do not know, this ancient Greek tale is about a boy named Icarus who, along with his father, try to fly away from an island that they're trapped on by using wings made out of wax. But Icarus would ignore his father's warnings and fly too high and close to the sun, causing Icarus to plummet to the ground after his wax wings inevitably melted. By starting Kong Skull Island with this imagery of a young Hank Marlowe falling from a sunny sky, Vogt-Roberts establishes this movie's strong Icarus sun theme from the jump, as it very much proves to be central to the overall progression of the film, as Colonel Packard would prove to be the foolish Icarus of this story, with King Kong himself becoming the very sun that Packard desperately tries to reach, no matter how many men he may lose along the way. because much like Icarus, Packard did not like being told not to do something, especially after the sting that came with the news that America was withdrawing from the Vietnam War. Packard's bald black ass could not stand that the United States was just running from the people that Packard was led to believe were the evil enemy. And that anger and shame Packard felt about losing the Vietnam War amplified exponentially as soon as Kong showed up to give Packard a whole new war to fight. Not only is this why Kong is framed within the burning sun when he makes his first appearance in the movie, but it's also why Kong Skull Island begins and ends with zoom-ins to golden yellow eyeballs that were very much designed to look like burning suns. I mean, the freaking logo for Packard's Sky Devils helicopter squadron also reflects Packard's obsession with chasing the sun, as we can see that it's just a giant griffin raising its winged arms to try and reach a sun. But actually, fun fact about this Sky Devils logo, director Jordan Vogt-Roberts revealed on Twitter a few years ago that this design was heavily inspired by the Hylian Triforce design from the Legend of Zelda series, which I thought was super dope, as the Triforce in Zelda is also heavily associated with the sun. Like, I could honestly do a whole breakdown series on the Legend of Zelda and its links to the sun, because I freaking love that franchise so damn much and appreciate Jordan's nerd levels greatly. Like, we need more nerds directing films, man. But anyways, not only is this sun theme central to this movie, but once you notice it, you'll also begin to understand why Kong marketing materials throughout all of his Monsterverse movies are typically themed with yellow and orange. Because Kong's species was exiled from the Hollow Earth to Skull Island a long ass time ago, Kong species became more associated with the yellow-orange sun that powered the world of the humans more so than the mysterious blue Hollow Earth radioactive power source that powers titans like Godzilla. So if you look at the logo for the new Godzilla X Kong movie coming out, for example, you'll see that Godzilla is in blue and Kong is in orangey yellow for this reason. I actually go into this a little during my breakdowns of the last few episodes of Legendary's Monarch Legacy of Monsters TV series, so definitely check those out if you love the Monsterverse and haven't seen those already. But anyways, back to the opening, the young Marlowe that falls is actually played by actor Will Britton, with John C. Reilly's voice dubbed over. Will Britton would appear in the movie again as a completely different character in the form of Hank Marlowe's son. But if you look at Marlowe's jacket, you can see the words "Good for your health" written on the back. This is actually a pretty sweet double-layered Easter egg, because it's a reference to Kaneda's jacket from the 1988 anime classic Akira that says the words "Good for your health, bad for your education" on the back, while also being a nod to John C. Reilly's character, Dr. Steve Brule, from the TV show Check It Out with Dr. Steve Brule, where his slogan is "For Your Health." And on the front side of Marlowe's jacket, you can see a patch with the words Lizard Company on it. Much like the director took inspiration with the Sky Devils logo, Vogt-Roberts also designed Marlowe's Lizard Company patch after being inspired by Travis Bickle's King Kong Company patch from the movie Taxi Driver, as this Travis character fought in the Vietnam War with this fake company. But anyways, young Marlowe lands on Skull Island during a World War II dogfight gone wrong with his soon-to-be best friend, Gunpei Ikari, who at the time was fighting for the Japanese army. According to the director, Gunpei Ikari's name is a tribute to Shinji Ikari from the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, as well as video game legend Gunpei Yokoi, who was instrumental for a number of Nintendo successes like, creating the Game & Watch system, designing the original Game Boy, and producing a number of classic Nintendo titles, with the original Donkey Kong being his first banger. So I feel like it was very fitting for this man to get a shout out in a Kong movie. Then after we get a zoom in on Marlowe's eye, that pupil turns into a sun as the Kong Skull Island title comes up. The opening credit sequence opens up with a July 20th, 1945 quote from President Truman that he said during the raising of the American flag at Berlin following Germany's surrender of World War II. Then we get images of Americans celebrating victory over Japan on August 15th, 1945, aka VJ Day, before getting this frame that says US unveils Earth satellite, as audio from President Eisenhower's October 1957 remarks about the US development of Earth satellites play. But if you look at this frame, notice how the top of it is blue while the bottom is orange, much like how the logo for the Landsat Satellite Monitoring Organization is modeled after these two blue and orange suns. Like I said before, this is the Monsterverse's way of teasing the two separate realms of the blue irradiated Hollow Earth and the orange solar irradiated human Earth. since Landsat stands for Land Satellite, having the hollow Earth blue sun over the word land, and then having the orange sun under the word sats in satellite was a perfect way to allude to both the subterranean and outer space cosmic energy sources, because the hollow Earth is in the land and satellites are in space, like the sun. Then a little later, as John Ortiz's name appears on the screen, a message from President Harry Truman authorizing Monarch's Project MUTO flashes in the background, a message which gave General Puckett the go-ahead to attempt the Castle Bravo nuclear bombing of Godzilla at Bikini Atoll. This letter made a brief appearance at the start of 2014's Godzilla movie, as it marked the very first time that the United States government decided to take massive unidentified terrestrial organisms, or MUTOs, like Godzilla and Kong seriously. Then, a little after this, we see a newspaper article that says, "Government denies missing third ship," with that article being a reference to the USS Lawton ship that Bill Randa was the only survivor of, something that Randa himself mentions while trying to acquire government assistance for his field trip to Hell. We of course learn in Monarch Legacy of Monsters that the USS Lawton somehow found its way to the jungles of the Philippines after being attacked by a mysterious kaiju, likely the Ion Dragon found on the scene. Then after we see some footage of the Russian launch of the Sputnik 1, the first satellite in space, we soon see these images of various MUTO skeletons from the CIA, with one of them possibly being the skull of one of Kong's species. Then after this, we get a quick flash of the Monarch logo with the X-ray of some type of snake or eel kaiju, followed by this drawing of a turtle MUTO that could either be a reference to the magma turtles featured in the prequel comic Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, or could also be a slight nod to the competing monster property Gamera, who is basically just a big-ass turtle Godzilla knockoff, but whose character is still very much loved by the people of Japan today. Like the Japanese really love their kaiju, man. Then a little after this, we get flashes of a monkey carrying a baby up a tree branch, quickly followed by an image of an octopus camouflaging into their surroundings, possible foreshadowing to when Kong himself is attacked by an octopus later on in the movie. A quote from Arthur C. Clarke about the future of mankind being dominated by machines instead of man or monkeys can be heard following this, very much foreshadowing Apex Cybernetics' secret plans of becoming the top apex predator on Earth with their Mechagodzilla program. Then John F. Kennedy's September 1962 speech about America's efforts to go to the moon play, before we get a bunch of flashes of historical footage, including the Apollo 11 space launch to the moon, a 1960 civil rights march, the first walk on the moon, and war reels from the Vietnam War. We then get a quote from Robert Kennedy that mentions an old Greek saying about taming the savageness of man and making gentle with the life of this world, which is the perfect way to end this opening credit sequence, as it perfectly encapsulates the overall struggle of this movie, taming the savageness of war-hungry men like Packard to try to make gentle with the life of Skull Island. Then the opening itself finally ends by transitioning to the scene of a 1973 Vietnam War protests at Washington, D.C., where Bill Randa and Houston Brooks arrive at the Capitol to beg for funding for their Skull Island excursion. And judging by Randa and Brooks watching Nixon announce the end of the Vietnam War on TV when they arrive for their begging session, the date of their arrival looks to be January 23rd, 1973, to be exact. Then, after Senator Willis gets Randa his piggyback with Landsat and calls up Packard for the military escort, we head to Saigon and get a shot of a Life magazine's Year in Picture review for the year 1973, with a cover featuring Richard Nixon, a space satellite, the Vietnam War, and tennis player Billie Jean King. When Randa and Brooks enter the bar, the 1967 song White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane can be heard playing in the background. Then we finally meet Tom Hiddleston's James Conrad, with Hiddleston himself actually filming this movie back-to-back with Thor Ragnarok because your boy stay booked and busy. But speaking of Marvel actors, after this we meet Brie Larson's Mason Weaver as she gets a phone call giving her the go-ahead to attend Landsat's survey of Skull Island. The dude on the phone mentions that Weaver is so damn good at being a photographer that she'll soon have her photographs featured on the cover of Time magazine, which is quite the professional achievement. Then, as the Sky Devils get ready for launch, we get a look at the back of one of their helmets, which contain a winged skull of a demon, perfectly encapsulating the Sky Devil theme. And in direct reference to their company logo, Packard calls the Sky Devil's deployment the Griffin and Ant Show, with the very people that they're leaving behind on the boat disappearing and becoming like ants as they ascend into the storm. And like I mentioned before, as the Sky Devils navigate Skull Island's perpetual storm, Colonel Packard recites the tale of Icarus and brags about how the US government isn't an irresponsible father like he felt Icarus' dad was. Which is quite ironic considering that Packard's irresponsible leadership is exactly what leads to him losing most of the Sky Devils, including himself. Like, Packard's prideful nature is exactly what led actor Samuel L. Jackson to rightfully compare his character to the reckless Captain Ahab of Moby Dick. Before they all enter the storm, Samuel L. Jackson tells everyone to hold on to their butts, which is a clear reference to the same line that he said in 1993's Jurassic Park. But after the group clears the storm, these devils of the sky drop their seismic bombs onto the unsuspecting populace of Skull Island, allowing Houston Brooks and Son Lin to discover that the earth under the island is completely hollow. The very first clue that would lead on to proving Brooks and Randa's hollow earth theories. But unfortunately for them, these deadly explosions trigger the arrival of Skull Island's greatest defender of life, Kong, who enters the movie by throwing a whole-ass tree at one of these Sky Devil helicopters, leaving all of these men to die without knowing that a giant gorilla led them to an early grave. The very beginning of the very first episode of Monarch Legacy of Monsters throws it back to this chaotic moment in Kong Skull Island. As the Griffin-themed Sky Devils face off against Kong, fans of the original 1933 King Kong movie can definitely see how Kong Skull Island paid homage to the iconic scene of Kong fighting those airplanes at the top of the Empire State Building. But unfortunately for Packard and his Sky Devils, they all flew too damn close to the son of the Kong legacy. And as a result, this pissed off not gorilla clipped the wings off of the Griffin and sent all of those helicopters hurtling to the ground. And right when Kong cuts off Paranoid by Black Sabbath, we get this ultra cool shot of this helicopter spinning out of control. A shot that Jordan Vaught Roberts says was inspired by a moment from one of the Resident Evil video games that he played. If I had to guess which Resident Evil moment that this director was referring to, it's probably the helicopter crash scene from 2012's Resident Evil 6. And I freaking love this shot of Kong standing to face the remaining Sky Devil helicopters with the sun behind him, because you can literally see all of these dumbasses approach this destructive force of nature just as foolishly as Icarus did in the myth. And it's a shot that shows just how different this Kong stature is from Peter Jackson's Kong from 2005, as Legendary's Kong stands completely upright compared to Peter Jackson's, who walked using his hands like a traditional silverback gorilla. But since Kong isn't a gorilla at all and is instead a member of the Titanus Kong species, Kong Skull Island went with the upright approach. And I really dig this decision, as I feel Kong standing on 2 feet shows just how evolved this King of Skull Island is in comparison to all the other kaiju found on that island. Because if you think about it, up until this point in the Monsterverse, Kong has really been the only one of these kaiju with the sentience to use objects like trees, chains, and boat propellers as weapons during battle, a cognitive advantage that has allowed him to become Skull Island's undefeated defender. But what's so great about Kong's evolved mind is that he doesn't use his superior intellect to be cruel towards others, but is completely dedicated to protecting the lives of his neighbors from anything that might do them harm. A spirit of compassion that likely stems from the traumatic loneliness that comes from being the last of one's kind. But anyways, after Nick Fury makes sure that Casey the Analyst is okay after getting messed up by a Megazord monkey, Packard regroups with his men and then points a gun straight at William Randa's face, who then proceeds to tell Packard that he only arranged this trip to Skull Island in order to prove to everyone that monsters like the Ion Dragon and Godzilla do exist, so that he didn't spend the last 30 years of his life trying to avenge the loss of his wife Keiko Randa for nothing. But we wouldn't learn that last part until Monarch Legacy of Monsters. But hey, fun fact about Bill Randa, the hat and vest that he wears throughout the movie appears to be a tribute to the character Carl Denham from the original 1933 King Kong film. But anyways, as Conrad's group of pacifists walk through the marshlands of Skull Island, they luckily come across a peaceful, giant, yak-looking scur buffalo, one of the few herbivores that we meet on Skull Island. while Packer's group of war dogs has significantly less luck as they run into a group of mother long-legged spiders. Spiders that take out a few of their own in the most brutal ways possible. Then Conrad's group unknowingly approaches an iwi settlement, causing Weaver to be surprised when one of the nearby walls turns into a camouflaged woman. And Weaver should be scared as that woman literally has her face. Like, that is just straight up Brie Larson in makeup pointing a spear at Brie Larson, which is quite hilarious. This confrontation then, of course, leads to John C. Reilly's older Hank Marlowe to approach and diffuse the tension, telling the group that they were all as beautiful as a hot dog and a beer at Wrigley Field on opening day, which is foreshadowing to the end of the movie when we see Marlowe enjoying a hot dog and beer while watching the Chicago Cubs on TV. After this, we catch up with Billy's soon-to-be slain dad, Major Jack Chapman, as played by actor Toby Kebbell, who just 3 years prior put out an amazing performance as the ape Koba in 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Due to his past experience with motion capturing, Toby Kebbell does double duty in Kong Skull Island by becoming the reference for Kong's facial animations, while actor Terry Notary was used for Kong's actual movements. But anyways, as Chapman stands by this large body of water, he fails to notice the giant tentacle of a Meyer squid just barely breach the surface. Like, were it not for the sudden appearance of Kong looking to have a quick drink and a squid meal after licking his wounds, Chapman himself would have become a different kind of squid meal. But luckily for him, he would become a skull crawler meal instead, because that Chapman got chomped, man. After this, the group follow Marlowe through the iwi camp and to the shipwrecked remains of a ship called the Wanderer that appears to have wandered off a little farther than intended thanks to the mysterious storm that has kept Skull Island a mystery to the rest of the world. This ship is a reference to the Wanderer ship from the 1932 written novelization of the 1933 King Kong movie. For mysterious reasons, the 1933 Kong movie calls Carl Denham's ship the Venture, whereas the novelization that came out the previous year refers to the ship as the Wanderer. So Jordan Vogt-Roberts decided to pay tribute to the ship from the book instead, as that one came first. But anyways, we then learned that the iwi converted this shipwrecked Wanderer into a holy site that details the history of the Kong species, who the iwi regard as their saviors. After thousands of years of these iwi being hunted down and eaten by the skull crawlers, the Kong species emerged from the hollow earth to drive the skull crawlers back and defend the iwi. However, by 1973, Kong's entire family had been wiped out by the biggest skull crawler of them all, the Skull Devil, leaving Kong with the double duty of Avenger and Defender as the very last of his kind. And during this explanation, we get our first look at the skull crawler species, a species that director Jordan Vogt-Roberts said he designed specifically after the first angel monster from the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, the character No-Face from the anime Spirited Away, and the Pokemon Cubone from the hit video game series Pal World. And speaking of video games, a little later, Marlowe introduces Conrad's group to his Gray Fox makeshift boat that he and Gunpei worked on in the past, with Gray Fox being a reference to the character Gray Fox from the Metal Gear Solid video game franchise, as Jordan Vogt-Roberts would soon be tapped to direct the upcoming Metal Gear film starring Oscar Isaac as Solid Snake. But don't get too excited because, you know, it's Avi Arad producing this one, so, you know. Fuck. And if you couldn't already tell by now, Jordan Vogt-Roberts is a massive fan of video games, which is why we get first-person shooter camera angles a number of times during this movie. And aboard the Gray Fox, one of Marlowe's baseballs, signed by Chicago Cub outfielder Bill Nicholson, can be seen attached. And while they're repairing the boat, one of the Landsat scientists informs Marlowe that humanity sent a man to the moon, which is quite ironic considering that that very same scientist would have his limbs removed in front of the sun after being lifted into the sky by a pack of leaf wings. Then a little later, we meet up again with Chapman for the last time, who ends up shooting at a harmless wooden spore mantis bug. But unfortunately for Chapman, those needless gunshots were all a nearby skull crawler needed to make sure that Billy never saw his dad again. Once again proving that making peace with nature, like Conrad's group does, is the way to survive on Skull Island. After this, when the sun goes down, Conrad's group heads to Marlowe's place for the night and listen to Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie. As Marlowe is shaving his beard, behind Marlowe you can see the shadow of an old school movie camera. According to visual effects artist Jeff White, this camera in the background is the exact same camera used by Carl Denham in the 1933 King Kong film, which I thought was a wild Easter egg to throw in the shadows. I also thought it was a nice touch to have Marlowe shave his beard in front of a cracked mirror, as that seems deliberately symbolic of his own inner cracked psyche. And while this is happening, Brooks tells Lynn about how he met Bill Randa after presenting his Hollow Earth theory to his fellow colleagues, only to be laughed at. But fun fact about these two characters, while this movie doesn't do a fantastic job at developing San Lin's character, we do learn in the Skull Island Birth of Kong comic that Houston Brooks and San Lin actually get married after these events and have a child named Aaron Brooks, who eventually grows up to become a security officer for Monarch. So definitely keep an eye out for that character if Monarch Legacy of Monsters gets a second season, as Aaron Brooks has a close connection with Skull Island. And as Weaver and Conrad have their own heart-to-heart, Conrad reveals that his father was part of the British Royal Air Force, and that Conrad thought his father was as cool as John Wayne, one of the kings of the Western film genre. Then a little later, after Conrad's group leaves the Iwi tribe on the Gray Fox, they reunite with Packard's group and stumble across the gravesite of Kong's parents, a gravesite crawling with skull crawlers, leading the group to literally crawl inside of a Kong skull themselves to avoid detection. But unfortunately, Bill Randa would be amongst those who become skull crawler food, along with this Sky Devil who sat himself atop this Triceratops skull. R.I.P. random guy. But anyways, moving on, later on at night, Conrad and Weaver are surprised by the sudden appearance of the King of Kongs himself, an event that would surely increase the brown levels of my boxers exponentially if that happened to me. But Weaver, having a braver soul than mine, actually takes the opportunity to reach out and touch Kong, leading to one of my favorite moments of the film, as it shows truly just how lonely this massive island guardian has become in his very young age. Being the last of a species exiled from their original Hollow Earth home dimension, Kong has largely grown up in near complete isolation, with no one to really call his family, as his entire species was wiped out by the skull crawler population, much like Godzilla species were wiped out by the Jinshinmushi MUTO kaiju that Godzilla got vengeance on in Godzilla 2014. I truly love Kong's reaction to Weaver's empathetic touch, as this is the first time that we see Kong put the tough guy act to the side for 2 seconds to soak in and appreciate a living being on the island trying to connect with him. And of course, Weaver's bonding moment with Kong is actually part of a long tradition of leading women in Kong movies, as Kong apparently has a weakness for attractive white women, a weakness that I too share from time to time. Just joking. I love all kinds of women. Women are all beautiful. But as nice as this moment is, it's kind of wild looking back at it, knowing that nobody on the cast actually knew how big King Kong was actually supposed to be. So Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston didn't really have much to go on during this moment outside of, there's a big ass monkey in front of you, so, you know, act surprised. Kong actually stood at a staggering 104 feet tall during the events of Kong Skull Island in 1973. And while this is big enough to make him tower above the denizens of Skull Island like the gorilla god that he is, he was still very much a growing boy at this point, which explains why by the time he faces off against Godzilla 51 years later in the year 2024, he would grow to a whopping 335 feet. For comparison, the original 1933 King Kong was 50 feet tall, while Peter Jackson's 2005 Kong was only 25 feet tall. So needless to say, if it ever came down to it, Legendary's Kong would eat those other 2 Kongs for breakfast, because that's one big ass boy. But anyways, later, after Kong kills Samuel L. Jackson, in the middle of him saying, "motherfucker," much like Thanos would do in Infinity War, we get the dramatically comical death of Earl Cole, who explodes after trying to trick the Skull Devil into eating him. However, though it appears like Cole died in vain, it seems like his explosion was exactly what Kong needed to find out where the Skull Devil was, so that he could brutally end that Skull Devil's life. And as the movie wraps up, we of course get to see Hank Marlowe's long-awaited reunion with his wife and son before Marlowe gets to pop open a cold one and enjoy a Cubs game on TV. But seeing as Marlowe is revealed to have a son here, this kind of makes me wonder if Tim from Monarch Legacy of Monsters could potentially be one of Marlowe's descendants. Like, that Monsterverse TV series has done a spectacular job of mashing up the families of Monsterverse characters that we've seen before in previous films, like it did with both the Randa and Brody families, so it wouldn't be too much of a shock to me if the mysterious Tim with no confirmed last name was revealed to be the descendant of Hank Marlowe and his son, one who joined Monarch after hearing the tales of his grandfather who survived on a mysterious island of monsters. But that's just a wild theory, to be honest. And finally, we have the post-credit scene, very much meant to tease the next movie down Legendary's Monsterverse pipeline, 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters. Monarch agents Brooks and Lynn hand Weaver and Conrad classified Monarch files, the first of which include images that were included during the opening of the 2014 Godzilla film, like the American military's attempt to kill Godzilla with a nuke at Bikini Atoll in 1954, as well as this map of Japan. But after this, they are of course shown photographs teasing at the past influences of monsters that would soon make themselves known to humanity only a few short decades later. Monsters like Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and of course, the three-headed Hydra King Ghidorah, the main big bad of Godzilla 2. You want a breakdown of Godzilla King of the Monsters from the year of our Lizard Lord 2019? Well, that can be arranged. Let's get it, my monster nerd babies. And y'all already know the deal. Liking this video and subscribing to the channel helps Heavy Spoilers to grow and lets us keep making these fun breakdowns for all of you guys. So if you guys want to help us out, you can do just that. Even before the movie starts, we got ourselves some sweet Easter eggs when the opening Warner Brothers and Legendary logos drop, as ancient carvings of Titans can be seen around those logos. The frame with the Warner Brothers logo has what appears to be the three-headed King Ghidorah on the right and the Kaiju Sekhmet on the left. Following this, the frame with the Legendary logo includes the avian kaiju Quetzalcoatl on the left and the Titan Mammoth Behemoth on the right. Then after we hear Godzilla's iconic scream, the movie starts off by sending us back to the events of the 2014 Godzilla film, as the red smoke from Ford Brody's Halo jump onto the city of San Francisco can be seen immediately as the movie starts at the top of the frame here. The camera then descends onto the San Francisco hellscape where the Russells struggle to find little Andrew Russell, who died when Godzilla emerged for his final battle against the Jinshin Mushi MUTOs at the end of Godzilla 2014. We see Emma Russell, the matriarch of the soon-to-be broken family, stare at Godzilla in absolute shock before the scene brilliantly transitions to a numb Emma Russell staring out into the foliage outside. This was a great way to show just how much the trauma of Godzilla's attack began to start to morph Emma Russell's mind, because she's literally staring out into Mother Nature, wanting to preserve Mother Nature from the pain of losing everything, much like she lost her family following the death of her son Andrew, a son that Emma turns to face through a family photograph nearby. In that photograph, we can see a younger Madison wearing a Boston Red Sox cap, very much foreshadowing the end of the movie where Boston's Fenway Park becomes crucial to helping stop King Ghidorah with the Orca. As a TV plays in the background, the scene shifts to news footage of a protest outside the White House. One of the protest signs on the screen says the words "Destroy All Monsters" on it, which is an Easter egg to the 1968 Godzilla film Destroy All Monsters, another Godzilla film that also featured King Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan, and Anguirus like this movie does. Hold on there just a minute, MT. I do not recall any Anguirus monsters making a ruckus in my Godzilla 2 Kaiju Boogaloo, so whatever are you talking about, Willis? And to that I say, nay on this day, for Anguirus makes a quick cameo in the movie right outside of Godzilla's subaquatic temple. Well, what's left of one of his species anyway. Then the news report then talks about how a recent uptick in dead fish across the world could be linked to mankind's hunt for Godzilla, a theory that would prove to be absolutely true, as we learn later on in the film that the military has been using oxygen destroyer detonations to kill kaiju. The oxygen destroyer bomb is a classic weapon from the Godzilla franchise that made its first appearance in 1954's original Godzilla film when Daisuke Serizawa used it to wipe out Godzilla from existence, sacrificing himself in the process. Godzilla King of Monsters of course pays tribute to this moment by having an oxygen destroyer nearly kill Godzilla and having a different Serizawa sacrifice themselves in an explosion in order to bring Godzilla back to life. But anyways, the news report ends with the reporter saying the words, "The day the world discovers that monsters are real." And when that reporter does, the camera slowly zooms in onto Emma Russell's face, very much meant to foreshadow her involvement as the true monster of the movie, something that her daughter Madison would call her later on when Madison finds out that her mom is a freaking lunatic. But anyways, speaking of the Russell family, I kind of like how Mark, Emma and Madison's family dynamic, kind of mirrors that of the three-headed dragon Ghidorah, a dragon whose three heads have distinct personalities. The middle head's name is Ichi and is the alpha head amongst them. and thus is the one in charge of the actions of what they all do as a unit. Much like Emma Russell's headstrong nature mainly guided the course of her family by being able to manipulate Madison against her father. And since Ichi literally means one in Japanese, then it makes sense for the second smartest dragon head on the right to be named Ni, which means two. And while Ichi is far more malicious than all three of them, Ni is the far more aggressive and bloodthirsty of the bunch and is always fixin' for a fight. Much like Mark Russell is throughout much of the movie when he keeps trying to tell the US military to do whatever they can to kill all of the kaiju. And keeping up with the number theme, the third dragon on the left is of course named San, which means 3. And because this dragon is the least intelligent of the bunch, director Mike Doherty decided to also give this third head the secondary name of Kevin, because he's as dumb as Kevin from The Office. But while Kevin is typically known as the stupid head because he's a little slower than the rest, a lot of this guy's slow behavior is heavily attributed to their curiosity. Kevin has a far more reserved trigger finger than all of his brothers, and likes to take his time to curiously observe his surroundings and the life forms around him, which are character traits that the young Madison shares. Additionally, both Kevin and Madison are also both routinely manipulated by the head in charge in order to fall in line. So it's interesting to me to see the Russell family dynamic sort of mirror King Ghidorah's in a way. But anyways, as the scene shifts to breakfast with the Russell girls, Madison is on her laptop looking through some emails. Around the unopened messages from her father, we can see an email from the Boston Globe newspaper linking to an article about the mysterious radiation emitted by the kaiju having been linked to a startling regrowth of vegetation in those regions. Emma Russell brings this very scientific discovery up later on in the movie when she reveals her true motivations behind her eco-terrorist activities. She wants to have all the monsters hiding within the planet to emerge so that they can walk around stomping on humanity while their radiation triggers rapid vegetation growth throughout the crumbled remains of global society. And you know what? As batshit insane as all of that is, I kinda see where Emma Russell is coming from. I mean, while I'm not co-signing the actions of this cuckoo science lady, this is clearly a woman that desperately needed the random chaos of Godzilla's arrival to make sense, because that act of nature is what led to the death of her son Andrew. So Emma chose to ease the pain of her loss by choosing to believe that her son died as part of some grand plan formulated by Mother Nature in order to save the planet as a whole by exterminating humanity. I mean, human beings are an extremely destructive species to the habitat of the planet after all, and it's primarily the wildlife that tends to suffer as a result of all that. So she felt like she was doing humanity a favor in the long run, but all she was really trying to do was trying to find her own logic behind the monster chaos that led to Andrew's demise. The sheer weight of the revelation that Titans exist on the planet and can easily kill your fragile family members caused Emma to snap, and that snapped mindset gave her a desperation to try to make sense of her new, nonsensical monster reality. But anyways, as Madison continues down her messages, we can see a February 28th, 2018 NPR News article about dolphin echolocation, something that Joe Brody was studying in Godzilla 2014 in order to uncover the mystery behind the Janjira plant meltdown, and a field that brought Maddie's parents, Emma and Mark, together while they were both studying animal bioacoustics at MIT, which eventually led them to settling down in Boston, which is why the Red Sox are a big part of this family's life. With their big nerdy science brains combined, Emma and Mark would make the Orca Animal Acoustic Replicating Device, originally intended to help whales and dolphins navigate their way away from the shore. But once Emma learned that the Orca could also be used to communicate with Titans, she started developing a new version of the Orca to do just that after her and her husband separated. But anyways, after this, an eco news alert about climate change to illustrate just how badly the planet has been ruined by humanity can be seen, followed by a June 13, 2018 article from the New Scientist magazine from author Penny Sarchet about humanity slowly zoning in on the place on Earth where life started 4 billion years ago. Then after this, there's an email linking to a June 23, 2015 National Geographic article by Nadia Drake asking if humanity can survive the 6th Great Extinction, with the article pointing out how the planet Earth has undergone 5 great cataclysms in the past that nearly wiped out all life on Earth, with Drake referencing climate change, the Ice Age, volcanoes, and meteors as examples of such apocalyptic events. So, needless to say, Emma Russell made sure that her daughter grew up as climate conscious as she was. further illustrating just how much Emma was trying to morph her daughter into being like her. Then when Madison finally checks the email that she's been ignoring from her dad, we can see that Mark Russell has been away spending his time taking nude photographs of wolves in the wild like the freak that he is. I'm joking, but since Mark Russell did spend his life studying apex predators and how animals communicate, he's been spending most of his time studying the vocal patterns of wolves after the death of Andrew caused him to become estranged from his family after a period of grief-fueled alcoholism. But anyways, as Maddie listens to Wave of Mutilation by the Pixies, she begins emailing her father back, telling him that she's worried about her crazy-ass mom. After said crazy-ass mom walks into the kitchen of burning bacon, we can get a clear look at the top of Maddie's laptop, where we can see the head of Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty stickered on, next to stickers of a monkey and a dinosaur, possible Easter eggs alluding to Kong and Godzilla respectively. As Emma goes to turn off the fire alarm, we can see a figure of a golden bird at the top of this kitchen cabinet here, directly facing the alarm, a possible tease to how the golden-winged Ghidorah would face the direction of the Orca device later on in the movie. Then, after Emma reveals to her daughter that she finally got the Orca working, the kitchen ominously shakes, causing a photograph of Emma and her mother to fall, foreshadowing the future events of the film where the Orca would be the cause of Emma and Madison's deteriorated relationship. And we quickly find out that all of that rumbling was happening as a consequence of the two living on a monarch outpost based in the Chinese Yunnan rainforest, where a Mothra egg was just about ready to hatch after sitting inside of an ancient Chinese temple dedicated to Mothra for a long-ass time. If you remember from the post-credit scene of Kong Skull Island, ancient artwork of Mothra could be seen referenced alongside those of Rodan, Godzilla, and King Ghidorah, very much meant to tease the events of this second Godzilla movie. After spending decades collecting these types of ancient clues pointing to Mothra, Monarch eventually had a bunch of their agents head to China in 2009, eventually coming across Mothra's cocoon in this ancient temple of the moth. Monarch would immediately contact Emma Russell to use her Orca device in order to study the sounds and life signs of the creature. So Emma has pretty much been studying Mothra's cocoon at Monarch Outpost 61 for about 10 years when we first meet her in Godzilla 2. Outpost 61 is actually an Easter egg for the year 1961, which is the year the first Mothra solo movie came out. When designing Mothra, the production wanted to underscore Mothra's femininity, as Mothra was one of the few female monsters in the classic Monsterverse. To that end, they decided to make Mothra glow with a bioluminescence to make her feel like a feminine angel, as her role in the Monsterverse was meant to be as a protector and champion for life, as well as one of Godzilla's greatest homies. In the movie, she uses her bioluminescence in order to convey her emotional state, changing colors as those emotions fluctuate. And partly because of this, much like in the classic Godzilla films, Mothra was worshipped like a god for the ancient people of the region. Most of the titans in the Monsterverse were actually revered as deities or demons by ancient civilizations, which is why the movie literally starts with us seeing carvings of people bowing down to monsters as the Warner Brothers and Legendary logos pop up, imagery that we see replicated when Monarch heads down to Godzilla's subaquatic temple home. Mothra was also closely modeled off of praying mantises, believe it or not, in particular her front legs that she uses to attack. But in order to make her a more formidable opponent in a world full of kaiju, the production opted to give Mothra a stinger as well. And seeing as Mothra is the queen of the monsters next to her King Godzilla, the movie also made sure that the queen was always repping her king on the streets by including the design of Godzilla's eyes on her wings, which I thought was a really nice touch. But anyways, as Emma and Madison make their way to the lab, we can see a bit of Emma's caring nature come out as she tries to get her colleague Tim to leave the premises before Alan Jonah and his mercenaries show up. But Tim, being a massive moth nerd who wanted to see a caterpillar wake up from their sleep, declines her offer to get some sleep himself. But unfortunately for Tim, he would be forced into the deepest sleep of all through a metal sleeping pill to the head, causing all of his nerdy moth knowledge to drip all over the floor. Lesson of the day: if your boss tells you to go home early, go home early. It's not worth it. But anyways, a little bit after Titanus Mosura is born and triggers Monarch's warning system, a Mothra egg can be seen on a computer screen with a very similar design to the original Mothra eggs from the old school Godzilla films. But anyways, a little later, after Emma uses the Orca to tap into the alpha frequency and calm Mothra down, we get this wide shot of Madison reaching out to this revered moth goddess in a tribute to Michelangelo's creation of Adam at the Sistine Chapel, which features Adam reaching his hand out to God. This beautiful moment is of course interrupted by the arrival of the eco-terrorist Alan Jonah, played by Charles Dance. A former colonel in the British Army before a stint at MI6, Jonah's long profession in the war business has caused him to develop a hatred for humanity, leading him to believe that humanity itself was a virus that needed to be eradicated for the good of the planet. In the novelization of Godzilla King of the Monsters, we learn that the kidnapping and brutal murder of Jonah's daughter Lindy was a major factor to Jonah turning on humanity as well. So Alan and Emma definitely have something in common there, as they both have lost their kids. But anyways, as the scene changes to the Senate hearing at Washington DC, we can see footage of Godzilla fighting the Jinshin Mushi MUTO from the 2014 film, as well as Bill Randa's footage of Kong that we saw him recording before those helicopters flew too damn close to the sun in Kong Skull Island. But anyways, after Monarch picks Mark up from taking photographs of wolves, they hand Mark a tablet full of monsters. As Mark swipes through that tablet, we can see x-rays of a number of titans, including Mothra, Rodan, Godzilla, the draconic mountain titan Methuselah, the armored spider titan Scylla, the mammoth titan Behemoth, and of course, our favorite King of Skull Island, Kong. Dr. Serizawa then tells Mark that Monarch had 17 different sites around the world where they were monitoring different titans that they've found. In Europe, we have the Loch Ness Monster, aka Leviathan, at Outpost 49, and the mountain kaiju Methuselah in Munich, Germany at Outpost 67. In Africa, we got the unseen titan Baphomet in Morocco at Outpost 68, the long-tailed lion titan Sekhmet in Cairo, Egypt at Outpost 65, and the mythical Mokole Mbembe horned river titan in Sudan at Outpost 75. Moving on over to Asia, we can see Monarch monitoring the foliage camouflaging kaiju Amhaluk over in Russia at Outpost 66, Mothra at Outpost 61 in China, the 8-headed serpent deity of Japanese myth Orochi is over at Outpost 91 at Mount Fuji, Japan, and Angkor Wat, Cambodia holds the mysterious titan Typhon. The titan Bunyip can be found chilling in Australia at Outpost 99 as that continent's only titan. Moving on to North America, Devil's Tower, Wyoming has got the monster Abaddon over at Outpost 77. Sedona, Arizona's Outpost 55 holds the spider kaiju Scylla. Stone Mountain, Georgia has the bioluminescent water dragon Tiamat at Outpost 53. Isla de Mara watches over Rodan at Outpost 56 in Mexico, and Castle Bravo over in Bermuda monitors Godzilla over at Outpost 54. With Outpost 54 being a nod to both the American military's failed attempts to blow up Godzilla using the Castle Bravo bomb at Bikini Atoll in 1954, as well as the first Godzilla film, which released in 1954. In South America, we've got the mammoth Behemoth in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil at Outpost 58, and Machu Picchu, Peru has got the titan Quetzalcoatl over at Outpost 57. And of course, Kong is chilling over at Skull Island, being monitored at Outpost 33, later to be moved to a new domed Outpost 236 by the events of Godzilla vs. Kong. Outpost 33 is a nod to the year 1933, which is the year of the first King Kong movie. And finally, King Ghidorah has been frozen in Antarctica at Monarch Outpost 32, an outpost that would be hijacked by Alan Jonah and all of his men. But the question still remains, how the hell did Ghidorah even get here in the first place? Well, according to director Michael Dougherty on Twitter, King Ghidorah was left to freeze in Antarctica after losing badly to Godzilla in the region millions of years ago. And while designing King Ghidorah, the VFX team was specifically told to focus on making them look the way that they do in Eastern mythologies, as opposed to how the West tends to design their dragons. The director specifically stating that he didn't want the dragons to look anything like they did in the Western-produced Game of Thrones series. And to craft King Ghidorah's look, they also studied the look and movements of King Cobra and rattlesnakes for inspiration. And you can definitely hear the sound of a rattlesnake whenever Ghidorah shakes their tail. But what's particularly great about King Ghidorah is how they literally have 3 dudes covered in ping pong balls crawl next to each other in order to capture the motion of this ancient Hydra dragon. But anyways, when the group arrives at Monarch Outpost 54, we get the lowdown on Alan Jonah's motivations to use kaiju, leading Dr. Rick Stanton to bring up the potential advancements that Titan DNA could have in the fields of pharmaceuticals, bioweapons, and and food, and how many nations and organizations across the world are hungry to study these titans for profit, foreshadowing the coming of Apex Cybernetics to the Monsterverse. As we would learn in both Godzilla vs. Kong and Monarch Legacy of Monsters, that Apex wanted to use Titan DNA to become the ultimate apex predator of the world. But anyways, after Mark and Monarch get up close and personal with Godzilla, they try to track him in hopes of finding the Orca and the Russell girls. When trying to figure out how Godzilla could have disappeared from their trackers, Dr. Stanton brings up Dr. Houston Brooks and his Hollow Earth theory, both introduced in the 2017 prequel movie Kong Skull Island. The younger version of Dr. Brooks was played by actor Corey Hawkins in Skull Island, while the older, modern-day version of the character appears later on in this film, played by actor Joe Morton. But anyways, a little later, after Emma wakes up King Ghidorah, I love how Ghidorah spreads his wings as wide as possible as Godzilla emerges onto the scene, because it's very much how birds tend to intimidate other animals in the wild. But while we were talking about this face-off, notice how different Godzilla's dorsal fins look compared to how they were presented in the 2014 film. Like, they look a lot more accurate to the classic dorsal fin look from the original Godzilla films. There's actually a canonical reason for this, detailed in the prequel comic Godzilla Aftershock, which reveals that not long after the events of the first movie, Godzilla had all of his back fins completely blown off during a fight with the Alpha Jinshin Mushi MUTO. So his fins look completely different in this movie because new, more evolved fins grew in their place. And it's not just the fins that evolved, Godzilla's actual size went through a bit of evolution from 2014 as well. Because in 2014's Godzilla movie, Godzilla was 355 feet tall, whereas in this movie, Godzilla has grown to a whopping 393 feet. Which is primarily why your boy Godzilla always be getting busy on the basketball court, because your boy got the verticality. But unfortunately for Godzilla, King Ghidorah is clearly a lot taller, as that malicious monster stands at a crazy 521 feet tall. But anyways, after this initial meeting of the gods, Emma Russell then FaceTimes Monarch to let them know of her plans to use Titan radiation to bring life back to the planet at the cost of a couple million lives, leading Emma to activating the sleeping Rodan from a nearby volcano at Outpost 56 in Isla de Mauro, Mexico. When designing Rodan, director Michael Dougherty looked at the body language and features of a number of predatory birds of the sky, in particular vultures, hawks, and eagles. And in order to create Rodan's screeches for the movie, he also used recordings from vultures, cranes, penguins, and owls, which is extra wild. Dougherty refers to Rodan as the king of the skies, and you can definitely see this during his fight with the American military. And we can see this exemplified the best during this movie when Rodan follows the advice of the great philosopher Peppy the Hare from Star Fox and does a devastating barrel roll to absolutely obliterate the pilots trying to take him down. Like, I love how he seems to smirk at one of the pilots trying to get away from him before he does this, because it shows just how much more adept to the skies that he is in comparison to all of these hairless apes flying their fragile toys. But then Rodan, of course, finds himself going head to head with the big bad King Ghidorah. And when they do, I love the movie's decision to make the background reflect this face-off by having the clouds split this frame down the middle, giving the flaming Rodan the side of the bright burning sun, and Ghidorah the cloudy darker side to match his darker evil nature. But unfortunately, Rodan would of course lose this fight, with Godzilla losing to King Ghidorah not too long after Rodan as a result of the US military's hasty detonation of their oxygen destroyer bomb, forcing Godzilla to retreat to his underwater home within an ancient temple built by a civilization that used to revere him. There, Godzilla would have spent a long period of time licking his wounds and healing from that fight, time that humanity no longer had, as Ghidorah would let out an alpha predator screech from atop Rodan's volcanic home that called for every dormant kaiju on the planet to bow down to his apocalyptic rule. I love the framing of Ghidorah dwarfing this Christian cross in the foreground because it truly symbolizes just how much this dragon devil has seemingly overcome humanity's savior Godzilla. However, during their fight, Godzilla would wound the great Ghidorah by ripping Kevin straight off of his body, a head that we would see appear again in the post-credit scene of the movie as one of the fishermen from Isla de Mara sells Kevin's head to Alan Jonah at the end of the film, a dragon head that Jonah would apparently sell to the douchebags at Apex Cybernetics in order for them to study and create the Mechagodzilla mental interface. So technically, Mechagodzilla had the mind of Kevin, which is kind of funny. But anyways, Ghidorah's cry would of course trigger Titans to begin to emerge from their dormant hiding spots, starting with Scylla over at Outpost 55 in Arizona, followed by Methuselah at Germany's Outpost 67, Yamata no Orochi at Outpost 91 at Mount Fuji, Japan, and Makole Mbembe from Sudan's Outpost 75. And right after this, we head back to Monarch Outpost 61 to watch the completed metamorphosis of Mothra's winged form with Houston Brooks and Dr. Ling Chen. Speaking of Dr. Ling Chen, she and her twin sister Eileen are two living Easter eggs in this movie, as they were confirmed to be an adaptation of the Shobijin twin priestesses of Mothra by director Michael Dougherty himself. Twin priestesses that first appeared in the 1961 Mothra film. Infant Island, the name of the island that these twin priestesses lived on, is referenced in the photograph of Eileen and Ling's mother and grandmother, who did some work on Infant Island as Monarch agents in the past. This would explain why both the Chen women are both obsessed with both Mothra and mythology in this movie. Both Eileen and Ling are played by the same actress, Zhang Ziyi. But anyways, a little later, the Monarch agents on the ship all look at the same ancient artwork of Godzilla fighting Ghidorah that Conrad and Weaver got shown during the post-credit scene of Kong Skull Island. Then shortly after, as Admiral Stenz gives his briefing, we get footage of all of the Titans around the world wreaking havoc on the human population, starting with Scylla in Arizona, followed by Behemoth in Brazil, and then Methuselah in Germany. During this briefing, however, I did notice that the soldiers of the G-Team all wear patches that say Mythis Noster Pixis, which roughly translates to "Myths are our compass," a phrase that Eileen Chen says to Mark earlier in the film. On their patches, we can see a winged creature on them with an appearance similar to that of Rodan. But anyways, Madison then stealthily sneaks out of captivity with the Orca and heads to Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts, a park whose mascot is the Green Monster, which I thought was very fitting, all things considered. But anyways, after Mothra emerges and helps Monarch find Godzilla's location, Dr. Serizawa sacrifices himself to save Godzilla as a tribute to the character Daisuke Serizawa, who does a similar sacrifice with the oxygen destroyer bomb in the 1954 Godzilla film. However, as the bomb goes off and begins to engulf Godzilla's temple home, right outside of the temple, the skeletal remains of the kaiju Anguirus can be seen. Anguirus, who first made his appearance in 1955's Godzilla Raids Again, is a longtime Turtle Titan Godzilla ally throughout the classic movies. And after this, a newly revived Godzilla shoots out a blast of atomic breath into the sky, likely as a way to remove the excess atomic radiation from his body from that blast. This of course leads to the final battle in Boston, where the very short-lived Mothra gives her life to save Godzilla from one of Ghidorah's blasts. However, due to their symbiotic relationship, the very act of Mothra dying over Godzilla's body allowed Godzilla to absorb her bioenergy in order to turn into his burning Godzilla form, a form that we saw for the first time in 1995's Godzilla vs. Destroya. Using this new form, Burning Godzilla is able to finally destroy King Ghidorah and rally the rest of the monsters throughout the planet to him, with Behemoth, Scylla, Ajinshin Mushi, and Rodan all showing up to bow down to the king. And after this, the credits play to a cover of Blue Oyster Cult's 1997 hit Godzilla and gives us a bunch of news articles and images, much like how Godzilla 2014 and Kong Skull Island opened. During this montage, we see that Monarch has released all 60 years of all of their monster data to the public, which is crazy for such a historically secretive organization. We then find out that Rodan chose to settle inside a volcano north of Fiji, which is pretty fun, followed by the extremely great news that a rainforest has popped up in the Sahara Desert, the Pacific coral reefs were returning, the deforested parts of the Amazon were growing back, and the ice caps were melting slower, all as a result of Titan radiation. And 14 species of animals were even taken off of the endangered list as a result of all this, which is nuts. So Emma Russell's actions actually did end up saving the planet in the long run, even though she did not survive to see this new planet. And this is pretty much why we see shortly after this that humanity is considering using Titan poop as a viable energy source. So definitely expect Titan radiation to play a big part in humanity's evolution moving forward in this monsterverse, because I am damn sure that Apex Cybernetics are not the only entities out there looking to benefit off of Hollow Earth radiation. Then, after showing us a number of dragon images from various cultures throughout history, we get articles hinting towards the seismic activity on Skull Island, leading to an increased presence there. This is of course meant to tease the next Monsterverse film, Godzilla vs. Kong, with the movie ending with an ancient drawing detailing Godzilla and Kong's historic rivalry. But my personal favorite piece of news that came from the credits comes in the form of this article that teases the coming of a second Mothra, as humanity would find another Mothra egg within Mothra's territory. So I'm super excited to see what this new Mothra looks like in the future of the Monsterverse. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of Godzilla, King of the Monsters. What did you guys think of this movie? Let us know in the comment section down below. Also, just a heads up, spoilers for Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 1 in this video. So if you haven't seen that season, watch out. Though I definitely recommend that you watch this show because it's pretty damn great. But anyways, the movie starts off with the Warner Brothers logo with an ancient drawing of Kong from the Iwi tribe of Skull Island on the left and depictions of the Iwi tribe on the bottom right of the frame. Right after this, the legendary logo appears with the ancient tribal depiction of Godzilla on the right, with tribespeople worshipping him on the left. These titans have been around for a long ass time, so pretty much all of them have been worshipped by the peoples of foregone eras who just assumed that they were all truly gods, with Kong and Mothra being two prime examples in both Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of the Monsters respectively. Temples of worship and myths were crafted around the emergence of these titans in the past, with a lot of these ancient cultures referencing an ancient rivalry between Godzilla and Kong species. A rivalry that would ultimately lead to Kong species losing and being forced to migrate from the Hollow Earth to Skull Island. But anyways, as both the Warner Brothers and Legendary logos come in, they each glow with a blue and red light, which are of course the main thematic colors of Apex Cybernetics, as well as the colors of the two main energy sources of this film. The blue Hollow Earth energy that powers titans like Godzilla, and the red energy that Apex makes after they secure a sample of Hollow Earth energy and synthetically recreate that energy. So using this blue and red effect early on in the movie was very early foreshadowing for the appearance of Mechagodzilla later on. Then, much like Kong Skull Island did, the movie opens up with a shot of the sun, before showing us Kong waking up. Like I went over in my breakdown of Kong Skull Island, Legendary has very strongly associated Kong with the sun of the upper space human realm, because much like the MCU, the Monsterverse is heavily centered around the concept of energies and energy sources. Since Kong is the last of the Kong species, who have been living in the human realm for a ridiculously long time, Legendary has associated Kong with the human realm's orangey-yellow sun. And because of this, Legendary will typically associate all of Kong's marketing material with an orange or yellow sunshine glow. Whereas Godzilla, a titan brimming with blue raspberry flavored Hollow Earth energy, is always marketed in a blue hue. The initial reveal trailer for the upcoming Godzilla X Kong movie has a blue glowing Godzilla skull and a yellow glowing Kong skull in the foreground because of this. Again, I go over Kong's connection to the sun in more depth in my Kong Skull Island breakdown, so if you want to check that out, feel free. It's really great stuff, and there's a really strong Icarus theme going on in that movie that I dive into, so check it out. But anyways, this all being said, I think that starting the movie off with the sun right before transitioning to Kong waking up was a really great choice here, combined with Kong being annoyed at Monarch's fake sun and turning a tree into a makeshift spear to chuck directly at that fake sun. Like, this was a fantastic way to get audience members new to Kong's character to see just how smart this titan is compared to your average animal. Like, this ape knew that that sun that he was staring at was fake because Skull Island has been his home for hundreds of years. So it's equal parts impressive and hilarious to see millions of Monarch dollars immediately go to waste in their attempts to fool a giant ape into thinking that he's not in a Titan prison cell. But anyways, as Kong goes through his morning routine and takes his big boy shower at a nearby waterfall, Bobby Vinton's rendition of Over the Mountain Across the Sea plays. The lyrics Over the Mountain A Girl Waits for Me can be heard right when the movie introduces Gia, a character played by deaf actress Kaylee Hoddle in her first ever role. A role that she plays fantastically. She is literally my favorite character in the Monsterverse movies. If anything happens to her in Godzilla X Kong, I will fight the theater staff. I will fight the AMC theater staff. Not a threat, it's a promise. I'm just kidding. Please treat your theater employees with with respect, or you won't get your Dune 2 popcorn bowl for your solo sexy time later. Be on your best behavior now. But anyways, before the events of this movie, Gia is actually rescued by Kong when Skull Island was made uninhabitable by a freak storm. Actually, it wasn't any freak storm. It was actually a combination of the freak storm that circles Skull Island all the time and keeps it hidden, with the remnant of the storm left behind by King Ghidorah. Because if you remember, King Ghidorah naturally produced a storm everywhere he went just by being an asshole. He just had an asshole storm with him at all times. But anyway, we learn in the Kingdom Kong prequel comic that another titan by the name of Camazotz decided to direct King Ghidorah's storm to Skull Island in order to make that island dark and dreary as hell, because Camazotz was a bat titan, and bats be loving darkness and shit. But although Kong took out the Camazotz with ease, the damage that both of these storms did to Skull Island was so great that it nearly wiped out the entire Iwi tribe, were it not for the intervention of Monarch. Kong and Monarch scientist Dr. Eileen Andrews both resolved to protect Gia after that event, making the three of them a weird-ass jungle family unit. Like, I always thought of Kong as Gia's metaphorical big brother because Gia's biological parents were also killed by a group of skullcrawlers, much like Kong's were, leading to Eileen Andrews adopting Gia as her own. Like, I love how Gia gives her little toy Kong a headband like she does because they sort of look like little Iwi tribal crowns in a way. So if Kong is the king of Skull Island, Gia is sort of like the princess of Skull Island in a weird way. I mean, in the first Godzilla X Kong movie trailer, we do see Gia sort of being treated like some sort of royalty by what appears to be the natives of the Hollow Earth. Possibly the same natives that could have been responsible for constructing that statue of one of Kong's ancestors that we saw in the throne room in Godzilla vs. Kong. So there could actually be a possibility that Gia could be revealed to be part of some Hollow Earth nobility of some kind, but who knows? That's just the vibes I'm getting from that trailer. But anyways, after this, the opening credit starts with the flipping pages of a notebook with words written in cursive. The one page I could read appears to be a letter from a scientist to another scientist with the words, "I want to see you." We then changed places and I listened to S for a while. Watson read a few paragraphs from the book, places where them ancient enemies were depicted in art and artifacts from archaeological sites and indigenous art from a vast variety of global cultures. Followed by the words, "The question always arises, if these creatures are so massive, why do we have had such difficulty documenting their origins?" At the bottom of the page. Not sure why he do have had to write it like that, because that sentence doesn't make any sense. But whoever is writing this is clearly an explorer of a historian of some sort, tracking Godzilla and Kong's rivalry throughout history. However, the mention of a Watson makes me believe that this passage could be a reference to 1967's King Kong Escapes, as a United Nations nurse named Susan Watson would end up forming a deep connection to Kong after traveling to Kong's Mondo Island with her colleagues Gio Nomura and Carl Nelson. So I have a feeling that the implication could be that we're looking at a letter from this rebooted MonsterVerse's version of Jiro Nomura to his love interest Susan Watson about the elusiveness of Godzilla and Kong species throughout time. But it also could be a letter from Carl Nelson, who knows. But anyways, after we see the words ancient enemies circled from this letter, we get ancient artwork of one of the titanous Kong species facing off against Godzilla, brandishing the same type of Godzilla scale battle axe that Kong would pick up later on in the film. Screenwriter Max Borenstein noted that Kong species had a bit of a refined civilization going on in the Hollow Earth before they were exiled to Skull Island in the Upper Realm. So, ancient civilizations depicting the Kong species crafting weapons out of the body parts of their enemies in order to prepare for battles proves just how mentally advanced Kong species were as a whole. After this, a Sumero-Akkadian cuneiform tablet from the late 4th millennium BC can be seen with the title Giants Battle Underground, to show just how long the Godzilla-Kong beef has been raging on for a long-ass time. Then shortly after, we can hear old-school audio of a man saying, "The interior of the Earth is made up of vast cabins and air pockets, joined by natural avenues," which is actually a quote from the character Dr. Jeremiah Morley from the 1951 film Unknown World, a story about a group of people who journey to the center of the Earth, much like this movie. This is followed by a depiction of the interior of the Earth by 17th century polymath Athanasius Kircher, with extra emphasis on the whirlpools and volcanic caverns of the image, as those were meant to reflect the whirlpool-like vile vortex portals that create wormhole tunnels to the center of the Earth. However, in this universe, this artwork has a skull crawler from Skull Island hidden inside of it, which I thought was a really fun detail to add. Then right after this, we can see the same ancient cave drawing of Godzilla fighting Kong that we saw at the very end of Godzilla King of the Monsters. This photograph was apparently taken by a group of mysterious explorers who went on a Hollow Earth expedition to Antarctica in 1926, never to be seen again, presumably because they fell down one of these portals. This is followed by images of Nathan Lynn's unsuccessful book on the Hollow Earth called Hollow Earth, Gravity Paradox, and the New Frontier, with a modernized map of what Lynn believes the Hollow Earth system to look like. Then shortly after this, we can hear a man saying the words, "There's an ecosystem out there, the likes of which we can't imagine, and the place to find it is this island," with that man actually being John Goodman's William Randa from Kong Skull Island, a character that we see photographed standing in front of a Kong skull just moments before he was brutally eaten and turned into skull crawler poop. Then after we get some shots of Kong's muscular and skeletal anatomy, we switch to some Godzilla data, with Godzilla's atomic breath being revealed to be the result of the ionization of hydrogen isotopes on this piece of paper here. And right next to that piece of paper, it's noted that Godzilla's atomic breath can reach up to temperatures of 20,000 degrees Celsius, which is 32,032 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you who don't speak the rest of the world. So, needless to say, this is more than your average halitosis. Then after we see footage of 2 nuclear bombs dropping, we can get a look at a map of Skull Island that emphasizes the perpetual storm that has made said island uninhabitable, followed by monarch imagery of Kong being kept in his biodome prison. Then Godzilla's nuclear pulse is highlighted next, which is something that we saw him unleash to the max onto that crabby bitch King Ghidorah at the end of his last movie. This is followed by footage of Godzilla shooting his atomic breath into the mouth of the Jinshin Mushi MUTO from Godzilla 2014. A MUTO wrongfully given the designation Titanus MUTO in this opening, because we hardcore Monsterverse nerds know that MUTO is just the scientific term for all of the massively unidentified terrestrial organisms on the planet. But we do learn that Monarch calls Godzilla's atomic breath down the throat of his enemies Godzilla's kiss of death, which I thought was very fitting because, you know, that's one fatal French kiss, man. Then we get some Kong statistics, which marks Kong as being 104 feet and weighing 158 tons, which is actually not accurate to the Kong of the modern day here. Those were just his proportions in 1973 when we saw him in Kong Skull Island. From 1973 to the year 2024, Kong has actually grown 3 times taller for Godzilla vs. Kong, standing at a whopping 335 feet. The notes on Kong call him highly adaptive and resourceful, capable of using tools like an axe, which is hilarious because we actually don't see Kong wielding an axe until this movie. So whoever wrote this note probably was referencing old Kong artwork from ancient civilizations, or must have had to have written it after the events of Godzilla vs. Kong. They also note of Kong's superpower durability and regenerative abilities, but that Kong is also susceptible to fire attacks. But then again, aren't we all? I mean, I know I am. Last time I checked. I haven't checked in a while, though. It then gives a list of creatures that Kong has fought and defeated, including a giant squid, a skull crawler, and a mysterious titan with no name, possibly referring to the Kamazots titan Kong disposed of in the Kingdom Kong prequel comic. The giant squid that is referenced here is actually called a Meyer squid, and the only person that actually saw Kong eat one was Toby Kebbell's Jack Chapman character, and that character's ass got eaten by a skull crawler before he could tell anyone, so I'm assuming that Monarch has discovered that Meyer squids are Kong's favorite food to eat on the regular, after observing him for so long. After this, we see stats on King Ghidorah, who's referred to as the devil with 3 heads, a quote that I believe was attributed to Dr. Graham, a devil who stood at a whopping 521 feet and weighed 121,000 tons. Much like your father after Thanksgiving dinner. Then the opening ends with a bracket of all the past titans Godzilla and Kong faced in the past, with footage of the Jinshin Mushi, Rodan, and Ghidorah being seen defeated on Godzilla's side, and footage of Kong fighting a skull crawler on Kong's side, right before the camera zooms in into the center of the planet, flashing the same rainbow of lights that we saw Lynn's Hollow Earth expedition team experience as they went through the Hollow Earth wormhole in this movie. This of course leads us to the Godzilla vs. Kong logo that again has Godzilla in a blue glow and Kong in a yellow glow to match the energies of the realms that they represent. Then the movie continues with Bernie Hayes recording episode 245 of the Titan Truth podcast, while holding a flip phone, very much showing his paranoia about having his conversations tracked by the all-seeing eye of Big Brother. Because next to nobody that isn't a drug dealer or, I don't know, Jason Bourne is using a flip phone in 2024. And on Bernie's lap, we can see the holster that he keeps his emergency alcohol in case he ever needs to take his last drink before meeting up with his super dead wife. Because, gotta say, that wife is super dead, man. As Bernie walks towards the Apex facility that he's been spying at for about 5 years, you can see the same helicopter that CEO Walter Simmons would use to escape Godzilla's coming rampage, landing on the roof of one of the buildings. Very much meant to foreshadow how the bigwigs at Apex knew that Godzilla was on the way before everybody else. Then, as a piece of Apex video propaganda plays, it starts with imagery of human eyeballs, quickly followed by the lens of a camera, a move that I believe was a bit of foreshadowing towards Apex construction of Mechagodzilla, as Mechagodzilla's eyeball is exactly what would be used to summon Godzilla over the course of this movie, in very similar fashion to the gamma radiation emitters that were used by Dr. Suzuki and Hiroshi Randa in Monarch Legacy of Monsters. For this reason, I believe that this movie has a little subtle eye symbolism going on throughout. You know, like how the symbol of Bernie's Titan Truth podcast is the Eye of Providence symbol at the top of a pyramid, you know, much like we see on American Money, which I believe is not so coincidental foreshadowing to the end of the film where Mechagodzilla's eyeball summons Godzilla from Apex's pyramid-shaped headquarters in Hong Kong, or how we can see an eyeball on the window of this noodle shop that Bernie, Madison, and Josh first meet up at. Then the Apex propaganda video mentions that Apex is working on advancements on the human mind and artificial intelligence, which is of course not only meant to foreshadow their development of the Mechagodzilla project, but also something that we saw firsthand in Monarch Legacy of Monsters. When Apex was originally operating under the name Applied Experimental Technologies, one of their employees, Cora, discovers that AET was conducting highly unethical experiments on the brains of chimpanzees in order to further their psionic sciences. Then, much like Walter Simmons was expecting, Godzilla goes full Florida man and attacks Apex's Pensacola facility, leading CNN to reveal that only 8 people died as a result, which is actually a pretty decent number, all things considered. The lower third of this report also reveals that Monarch has set up 3 temporary relief shelters to aid people in the area, with one of those shelters being managed by Madison's father, Mark Russell, played once again by actor Kyle Chandler. Fun fact about Kyle Chandler, Godzilla vs. Kong would actually be Chandler's second appearance in a King Kong movie, as he would play the character Bruce Baxter in 2005's King Kong movie as well. So something tells me that your boy Kyle loves him some massive monkey. As Madison watches the CNN footage in class, a poster of a dinosaur can be seen behind her, which is an obvious allusion to Godzilla, because, you know, Madison be on Team Godzilla. Next to the TV, a poster that says "Titans are everywhere, stay aware" can be seen, showing just how much the world has been forced to adjust with Titan appearances as their new normal. A Titan preparation is key poster can also be seen after students exit class at the bell. Then later, when we first meet Nathan Lind at Philadelphia's Denham University of Theoretical Science, we can see him sitting alone in the dark holding a toy astronaut, with that astronaut being clear representation for Nathan's dead brother David, a brother who died as a result of a trip to underspace that went horribly wrong due to the unexpected force of the hollow Earth's gravity. So Nathan very much viewed his brother as an astronaut of sorts. As Ren Serizawa sneaks through Nathan's front door, we can see that Nathan stuck a drawing of a man with their brain hollowed out with the words Hollow Earth HQ. This movie's subtle way of showing us just how much Nathan has accepted nobody in his field taking him seriously. David Lind was actually appointed Monarch's head of interterrestrial exploration in 2021, the very same year of his tragic accident during his trip to the Hollow Earth, trip that saw the aircraft that he was using completely crash under the weight of the sudden inverted Hollow Earth gravity. If Ren Serizawa's name sounds familiar, it's because he's actually the son of Ken Watanabe's Ishiro Serizawa, who died exploding himself to resurrect Godzilla in 2019's Godzilla film. Played by actor Shun Oguri, Ren Serizawa joined Apex in large part due to his father ignoring him most of his life to go hunt for dinosaur bones and mythical monsters. Ishiro was so obsessed with his job that he even missed out on his own wife's funeral because he was so preoccupied with Monarch business. So you can understand why Ren would want to side with an evil organization bent on killing every Titan that they can find. It was Ren's way of destroying everything his father stood for, as Ishiro Serizawa spent his entire career trying to get humanity to coexist with Titans. Anyways, as Walter Simmons introduces himself like some type of Mexican ninja, he drops one of Nathan Lynn's books next to some classified Monarch documents. Classified documents detailing the operations of the Topex Poseidon satellite that was launched in August 1992 to record the topography of Earth's oceans. Data that Nathan undoubtedly needed for his research into the hidden world underneath the surface. Then after Simmons shows Nathan magnetic imaging of the Hollow Earth system of tunnels, Wren notes that the energy readings that radiate from the Hollow Earth match those that emanate from Godzilla, which makes sense considering that Godzilla and the Hollow Earth both are brimming with the same blue, powerful, life-bringing energy that comes from the very core of the Hollow Earth itself. A near-infinite energy source that Walter Simmons coveted for his ultimate Mechagodzilla Apex Predator. When Nathan agrees to team up with Apex and mentions that he needs the help of an old colleague, the camera zooms in on a picture of Rebecca Hall's Eileen Andrews on the cover of Scientific Future magazine, giving Andrews the title The Kong Whisperer. The scene then transitions to Kong's biodome, where we see that Kong tried to throw 2 more tree spears at the fake sky in protest of his imprisonment. As Nathan Lind attempts to recruit Andrews to his excursion, he mentions how Andrews always thought Skull Island was the Hollow Earth brought to the surface, which would make sense considering that the Kingdom Kong prequel comic would reveal Skull Island to have a Hollow Earth tunnel entryway as well, an entryway where all the Titan wildlife on the island initially came from. When Eileen agrees to tag along with Nathan, Elvis Presley's Loving Arms plays as a shot of ships carrying Kong to Antarctica float into frame. The first boat that we see has the number 85 on it, which could be a reference to the film Godzilla 1985. But one of my favorite shots of this movie comes when Nathan Lynn introduces himself to Walter Simmons' daughter, Maya, played by actress Eiza Gonzalez. As the two shake hands, notice how the sun is positioned in relation to the clouds, because the sun looks like a pupil inside of a giant cloud eyeball, a sunny eyeball seemingly staring down at Maya Simmons. Considering that this movie seems to have a strong eyeball theme going on, combined with the fact that Kong Skull Island firmly established Kong to have a strong symbolic connection to the sun, I sort of see this solar eye as Kong's eye, foreshadowing the last thing that Maya Simmons would see before she is obliterated by Kong himself later on in the movie. But anyways, as Eileen Andrews is talking to the ship's captain later on, she says that all Titans seem to have a way of detecting the threats of other Titans, which is something that Apple TV's Monarch Legacy of Monsters dives into when it explains that the gamma radiation that Titans emit are exactly how Titans are able to find each other so quickly. But anyways, the scene then transitions to Madison listening to Bernie's Titan Truth podcast as the camera focuses in on this newspaper article about Madison's dead crazy-ass mom, Emma. An article that questions whether or not Emma should be remembered as a villain or a savior, which is definitely pointing towards the end of Godzilla King of the Monsters when closing credits news articles reveal that Emma Russell's actions caused a global increase in Titan radiation, which in turn caused a number of previously dead areas around the world to flourish with new vegetative life, which is exactly what Emma Russell always intended when she and Alan Jonah released all the Titans onto the planet with that Orca device. And behind that article, a copy of the incarnation of Ahriman, the embodiment of evil on Earth, can be seen, possibly implying how Emma was a secret embodiment of evil in disguise. But what I found hilarious is that immediately following this, we can see Madison typing in the Titan Truth podcast web address onto her computer, with a whole ass www prefix at the start, which implies that Madison types www before every website like some type of psychopath. Like, these Russell women just ain't right, man. But anyways, as Madison goes through Bernie's podcast titles, episode 244 was apparently all about Bernie's theories on Mothra's pregnancy, and asking just who Mothra's baby daddy could be. This, of course, is in reference to the end of Godzilla King of the Monsters, where a news article revealed the discovery of a new Mothra egg after Mama Mothra died protecting Godzilla. Madison's bestie Josh then rolls up with his brother's van while appropriately blasting Breaking the Law by Judas Priest, which leads them both to go on a search for Bernie by tracking down Bernie's bleach dealer, a dealer who references the internet era where all the children were eating detergent pods to help speed the brain damage along. Then later, after everyone learns that Kong and Gia have been signing to each other this entire time, Gia tells Eileen that Kong was afraid to reveal his big brain energy to humanity, likely in large part to him being studied in a massive biodome prison. Kong was smart enough to know that he was being treated like a science experiment and didn't trust humanity enough to talk with them, which I thought was super interesting. This is then, of course, followed by Godzilla's inevitable attack on the convoy of 11 ships. As Godzilla and Kong engage in their first fight, I found it super impressive that Kong was smart enough to dodge Godzilla's atomic breath without ever seeing it in action before. Though you can probably attribute that to Kong's genetic memory, as a number of his species have tussled with Godzilla's people in the past. And in order to help Kong, Eileen Andrews convinces the convoy to deploy depth charges, much like the seismic charges that Landsat used in Kong Skull Island to map out the area. Then after this, we see Bernie, Maddie, and Josh break into the ruins of Apex Pensacola, where they find Apex's hidden subterranean base, a base that Bernie assumed was the sign of Apex creating a secret breakaway civilization for the elite. You know, in case one of the elite accidentally hits the doomsday button, which is, ironically, what sort of happens in this movie. But while Bernie was technically wrong, his suspicions weren't completely unfounded. In Monarch Legacy of Monsters Episode 5, we learn that organizations like Strata Secure Homes exist to provide the elite with custom bunkers in the event of a Godzilla attack. So Bernie is probably assuming that Apex has a network of such bunkers to form a hidden colony for the rich, which is totally, you know, a rich person thing to do. Apex Hong Kong is literally a giant Illuminati pyramid too, which is kind of hilarious. Like, they're not even trying to hide it. Then immediately after this, the group learns that Apex has been collecting skull crawlers, which they would later learn were being used as target practice for their Mechagodzilla. The ending of Monarch Legacy of Monsters sort of sets this up by revealing Apex's presence on Skull Island when May and the random women return from the Axis Mundi dimension. Then, as a solution to their boats being destroyed by Godzilla, Apex decides to carry Kong with a fleet of hardy helicopters, a strong nod by director Adam Wingard to 1962's King Kong vs. Godzilla, where King Kong is transported via balloons. And after Kong is encouraged by Gia to enter the Vile Vortex in order to be transported to the Hollow Earth, the gang hop into Apex's Hollow Earth aerial vehicle and follow Kong. As they travel through the vortex, notice how the vortex shoots them all into warp speed as flashing lights surround them. Much like the Monarch show would emphasize, this is because the Hollow Earth itself isn't actually inside of the planet Earth, but is instead another dimension entirely with warp gates inside of the planet. This trip to the Hollow Earth was meant to be an interdimensional journey as opposed to people literally journeying into the planet's core. Because, I'm not sure if you heard, but the planet's core is very hot. It's very hot. I hear it's even hotter than Africa, but you know, those are just rumors. Africa's pretty hot. But anyways, as Kong begins to explore the Hollow Earth, we can see a number of Hollow Earth creatures make quick cameos, like these leaf wings that fly overhead, this warbat that Kong absolutely murders and then eats like a frickin' freak, and these mantle claw crabs that perfectly camouflage into the ground. Bill Randa actually ran into one of these mantle claw crabs in the opening of Monarch Legacy of Monsters on Skull Island in 1973. Then one of these mantle claw crabs are eaten by the fan favorite Hollow Earth lizard dog, Titanus Doug, a monster that Adam Wingard loves so much that he decided to include in a much bigger role in the upcoming Godzilla X Kong film. So all of you Doug lovers out there can feel free to eat some crab and rejoice, because Doug is coming back. Then as Kong approaches the peak of the mountain, he reaches out to a stone hand as he floats away to the upper side of the Hollow Earth, giving us another homage to Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam, much like we saw Madison do with Mothra in Godzilla King of the Monsters. And later, when Team Madison comes across Mechagodzilla for the first time, we also see Ren Serizawa sitting comfortably in the same King Ghidorah head that we saw Godzilla remove in Godzilla 2019, with that head being the head of the stupidest Ghidorah head of the bunch, Kevin. But what I really dug about this concept was that it truly made Godzilla a symbolic mashup of both Godzilla and Kong's greatest enemies up until that point, as we see Ren Serizawa becoming a metaphorical skull crawler, by crawling into the skull of Ghidorah and using Ghidorah's ability to quickly regenerate their own neural pathways to create a supercomputer capable of controlling the Mechagodzilla mech. So Mechagodzilla is essentially a skull crawler and King Ghidorah combined, in essence anyway. But anyways, later, we see Kong approach the Hollow Earth Castle, a castle seemingly built underneath a massive weather anomaly that appears to perpetually hover between these two sides of the Hollow Earth realm. If I were to guess, I think the storm was actually created as a result of the energies within the Hollow Earth itself being channeled through the top of this Hollow Earth castle. And I suspect the other side to have a similar looking structure as well, with both of those energies colliding together to create the storm. Like, I definitely feel like the storm is a byproduct of the core of the Hollow Earth. The actual throne inside of the structure appears to be where a ton of Hollow Earth energy from the Hollow Earth core is concentrated for this reason. But before Kong opens the doors to the throne, a red hand from one of his species can be seen on the door, possible foreshadowing to the Scar King's past war with the Kong species in the Hollow Earth. When Kong enters, Kong pulls his battle axe from the skull of what looks to be a skullcrawler and takes his seat on the throne, officially making his claim as King Kong. As Kong sits on the throne, Hellhawks can be seen on the ceiling, staring down at him and scoping out some of the humans for future snacks. Then soon after this, Kong's genetic memory triggers him to putting his axe on a marking on the ground, causing the Godzilla scale on the axe to draw energy from the Hollow Earth core. Because if you remember, Godzilla himself appears to be a massive energy sponge of a beast, so it makes sense that his scales could do this as well. And in response to Apex activating Mechagodzilla, Godzilla appears in Hong Kong, causing Monarch director Guilerman, played by the late and great Lance Reddick, to call for an evacuation of the city. Reddick also cameoed in the 1999 Godzilla film from TriStar in an uncredited role. Rest in peace, King. We miss you. You're one of the greatest to ever do it. But anyways, as the castle begins to collapse as a result of Godzilla's blast, we can see a statue of a past Kong begin to fall, very much implying that there is a sentient race of beings in the Hollow Earth itself that is advanced enough to create art to honor important figures. A race of people that we might have seen make an appearance in the first Godzilla X Kong trailer. And after Maya Simmons betrays the good guys by sending the Hollow Earth energy signature to her father, who apparently has the greatest Wi-Fi signal in existence, we can see that some type of glitch or something in the processing caused that Hollow Earth energy signature to go from blue to red, possibly implying that Apex created a new but unstable artificial strain of Hollow Earth energy. Then Godzilla would apparently find a vile vortex directly underneath the city of Hong Kong and then would shoot an atomic breath blast at that vile vortex to reach Kong. But anyways, after Kong jumps through the hole that Godzilla made, Kong and Godzilla start their face-off. And I freaking love how Kong learned from his first fight with Godzilla and focuses on making sure that Godzilla cannot fire off his atomic breath. And to this aim, Kong pretty much goes immediately to his Kong patented jaw-ripping move that Kong iconically used on a T-Rex in both the original King Kong movie and Peter Jackson's movie from 2005. But of course, Godzilla wasn't having any of that. But my favorite shot from this fight comes when we see Kong hanging from the top of this building here, as it definitely feels like a homage to Kong's dangling off the Empire State Building in 1933. But of course, Godzilla and Kong's fight would be interrupted due to King Ghidorah's regenerative abilities being so diesel that its nervous system was able to override Ren Serizawa's control, electrocuting Serizawa in his chair, leaving him seemingly dead. However, I believe that there is a strong chance here that Serizawa did not die from this at all, but instead could have had his brain overwritten by King Ghidorah's mind as well, due to his brain being connected to Ghidorah's. So if Serizawa survived, I could definitely see King Ghidorah possessing his body and becoming a monster-human hybrid of a villain in a future Monsterverse movie. We saw a very similar thing happen in Pacific Rim Uprising with Charlie Day's character after he melded his mind with a kaiju. But anyways, a little later, Godzilla and Mechagodzilla have a very Dragon Ball Z inspired clashing of atomic energies, proving that Mechagodzilla and Apex's new red energy to be the superior power. And Mechagodzilla was about to kill Godzilla with Godzilla's own Kiss of Death move if it wasn't for King Kong saving the day at the insistence of his sister Gia, ending the Titan clash with King Kong as the victor over Mechagodzilla after suffering an initial defeat from Vanillazilla. Director Adam Wingard only accepted to do this project if he could end the movie with a distinct winner. So in the Godzilla vs. Kong matchup, the winner of that fight was ultimately Godzilla. But when it came to Mechagodzilla versus everyone, Kong took the crown. Then the movie of course ends with the Hollies singing The Air That I Breathe, accompanied with the revelation that Monarch has installed an outpost in the Hollow Earth to monitor Kong and explore this new habitat. An installation that the first Godzilla X Kong trailer revealed that we will be seeing again very soon. But anyways, that's it for this breakdown of Godzilla vs. Kong from 2021. What did you guys think of this movie? Let us know in the comment section down below. But anyways, Godzilla X Kong: A New Empire is of course the follow-up to the massively successful Godzilla vs. Kong from 2021. And with that movie ending with our boy Kong roaming free in the Hollow Earth after being stuck in a big old Monarch science dome on Skull Island for years, this movie starts off in a very similar fashion. And though Kong is super amped about living in a realm tailor-made for some someone as big as him, Kong is still very much burdened by the same loneliness that we first saw him express in 2017's Kong Skull Island when we first met him in the year 1973. With this movie being set in the year 2027, it's kinda sad to see Kong still deal with a deep sense of loneliness as a result of being the last Kong from Skull Island. But he's not completely alone due to him apparently adopting Titanus Doug, a fan-favorite crocodile-like titan that director Adam Wingard introduced in Godzilla vs. Kong and made sure to bring back for the sequel, this time as one of Kong's pets, who we can see playfully stealing half of Kong's wart dog haul for himself to eat. And according to the audio descriptions found in Godzilla vs. Kong, Doug is actually a Pheidodon, which is a fictional species of titan that first made their appearance in Peter Jackson's 2005 King Kong film. And even though Kong is an independent great ape who don't need no man, even Kong needs a little help from the dentist every now and then. So a toothache that Kong is experiencing is apparently so bad that it leads him to heading back up from the hollow earth to the surface to meet back up with his favorite human, Gia Andrews, played by deaf actress Kaylee Hoddle, who made her first on-screen appearance in 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong, where we learned that Kong had actually saved Gia from a devastating storm on the Iwi and Titan-inhabited Skull Island before Gia was ultimately adopted by monarch scientist Eileen Andrews. However, even though Gia's first on-screen appearance was in Godzilla vs. Kong, her first ever official Monsterverse appearance was in the pages of the official Godzilla vs. Kong prequel comic, Kingdom Kong, a comic that specifically goes into that tragedy on Skull Island and how a bat-like titan called the Kamazots was responsible for the radical climate shift that led to the evacuation of the Iwi tribe, with the final pages of that comic literally showing us the Iwi tribe being evacuated onto Monarch choppers with Gia amongst them. So it seems like director Adam Wingard decided to retcon all the Iwi being evacuated completely and just have Gia be the last of her people, likely so her and Kong could have a shared trauma that bonds them as interspecies siblings. Along with Gia is her mother Eileen, who is sporting a new blonde pixie cut this time around, a hairstyle that Dr. Andrews actress Rebecca Hall made personally on her own time before she started working on this movie. And since Hall was very adamant about not having to wear an uncomfortable wig for this movie, Adam Wingard decided to have Eileen's new hairstyle match her new elevated position at Monarch, with Eileen having been promoted to head of Kong research at Monarch after working as a senior scientist on Skull Island for years. Now based at a Monarch Hollow Earth access point in Barbados, Dr. Andrews now works under new Monarch director Hampton, played by actress Rachel House. The last Monarch director was of course director Gielerman, played by the late and great Lance Reddick, who died in March 2023 at the age of 60. R.I.P. to a true acting legend. But with Hampton as the new head of Monarch, as far as we know now, it seems like Monarch is now headed by two strong women, as we learned in the Monsterverse TV show Monarch Legacy of Monsters that the deputy director of Monarch is a woman named Verdugo. But whether or not Verdugo is still deputy director of Monarch 10 years later in 2027 is still a mystery. But anyways, despite Eileen's new promotion and rock star status as the world's most proficient Kong whisperer and Godzilla apologist, Eileen is still very much a mom first, and something real weird has been happening with her adoptive daughter Gia. Gia has been experiencing some really strange dreams and visions that have been causing her to repeatedly draw 3 pyramid figures absent-mindedly, while also giving her an urge to visit the hollow earth itself. And when Eileen discovers that Gia's crazy girl scribbles was starting to match some strange signals that Monarch had been getting from the hollow earth, Eileen immediately sets out to find some answers and some qualified help, which is why she flies her ass to Florida in order to meet up with Bernie Hayes, played by actor Brian Tyree Henry for the second time after making his debut as a Titan Conspiracy podcast host in Godzilla vs. Kong. When we catch up with Bernie in this movie, he's doing an ad for Gargantua Insurance, which feels like a reference to Toho's 1966 film, War of the Gargantuas. And when we get a look at Bernie's latest Titan Truth podcast episodes, we can see the third episode on the list is called Planet X on the Horizon, which is only the first reference to the alien Planet X from the classic Godzilla films that was home to the Zillion alien race introduced in 1965's Invasion of Astro Monster. In that film, the Zillions would trick humanity into sending Godzilla and Rodan to their planet under the guise of helping them stop King Ghidorah from destroying them, only to end up mind-controlling all 3 of these titans in an attempt to invade planet Earth. Having the words Planet X on the horizon appear on this list could be director Adam Wingard's way of teasing his personal plans for a Planet X-centric sequel for this film, but that has not been confirmed whatsoever. The 4th episode on this list is called Monster Island, Fact or Fiction, with Monster Island being a popular island home for titans properly introduced in 1972's Godzilla vs. Gigan after first being teased in a dream sequence in 1969's All Monsters Attack. The 8th episode on this list features the film's only reference to Millie Bobby Brown's Madison Russell character, as Bernie apparently had her on his podcast to discuss her Mothra twin moon base theory following their Godzilla vs. Kong team up in Hong Kong. And while complaining about how Monarch did him dirty after the events of Hong Kong and Godzilla vs. Kong, Bernie also laments about how internet trolls like Ghidorah Stan 64 keep mocking his work, with the 64 in Ghidorah Stan 64 being a reference to King Ghidorah's first appearance in 1964's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. However, much like I brought up in my ending explained for the New Empire, I think that there is a strong possibility that this Ghidorah Stan 64 hater could be a corrupted Ren Serizawa himself, a man whose fate remained a mystery after the consciousness of Ghidorah fried his brain and body after Ren tried to connect minds with Ghidorah for Apex Cybernetics, which is something that Charlie Day's Newt character did with a kaiju brain in Pacific Rim Uprising, which I don't think is a coincidence. Since both of these franchises are legendary productions, there is a chance that Ren Serizawa's brain was also infected by the consciousness of Ghidorah and now lives amongst humanity as a human being plotting his revenge, but that's just a fun theory I had. After Eileen shows Bernie the 3 pyramids from Gia's drawings and Monarch's readings, Bernie agrees to head to Monarch with Eileen, just as Godzilla has started to move from his favorite napping spot outside of the Roman Colosseum in Italy, a napping spot Godzilla chose because it felt a lot like his former subaquatic home that was nuked by Dr. Serizawa in Godzilla King of the Monsters. Adam Wingard actually had Godzilla curl up inside of this Colosseum because his cat named Mischief does the same thing when they sleep. Actually, a lot of Adam Wingard's personal life affected a lot of this movie, especially the toothache that causes Kong to head back up to the surface world of the humans. While Adam Wingard was filming the 2011 movie You're Next, Wingard experienced one of the worst toothaches of his life, a toothache that led to him having surgery on his gums in order to alleviate. So, as a response to that particular time in his life, Adam Wingard gave Kong a similar toothache as well. But anyways, a pretty big reference to Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim appears briefly when Godzilla wakes up from his nap at the center of the Colosseum. An outline of the Pacific Rim kaiju knife head can be seen on a nearby wall in Rome, right next to a giant graffiti image of a chubby Godzilla eating 2 slices of pizza with sunglasses on without a care in the world. This is the first clear reference to Legendary's Pacific Rim universe that the Monsterverse has ever made, but it's not the only one. A little bit later in the movie, when we see the blueprints for the Beast Power Glove that Monarch ends up gifting to Kong to help him deal with his frostbite injury, is actually straight up the arm of the Jaeger Gypsy Danger from 2013's Pacific Rim. And there were also pretty strong talks in the past at Legendary about their Monsterverse crossing over with their Pacific Rim universe, especially since Pacific Rim 2 director Stephen DeKnight confirmed on Twitter a few years ago that serious consideration about a 3rd Pacific Rim movie teasing a massive crossover with Godzilla happened at Legendary at some point. But anyways, behind Godzilla in this image can be seen a flying saucer, which seems like a nod to the Zillion alien race from 1965's Invasion of Astro Monster. To the right of this UFO can be seen the words "punch, punch, punch," hovering over the drawing of the arm of the sentient robot hero Jet Jaguar, who made his first appearance in 1973's Godzilla vs. Megalon. Punch, punch, punch is a reference to the lyrics of Jet Jaguar's theme that was introduced during that very same film. At the bottom right of this graffiti, the words "save the blank" can be seen in between the creepy ass eyes of the monster Hedorah from 1971's Godzilla vs. Hedorah, with the "save the blank" likely being a reference to the words "save the earth," which is the name of a song that plays repeatedly throughout that movie. And the mysterious bones from 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla can also be seen under the blue outline of Knifehead to the left of Godzilla, with these massive turtle bones also being called a skeleturtle by hardcore Godzilla fans at that time. But anyways, Godzilla's sleeping in this Colosseum actually has some pretty strong ties to the overall solar theme that this movie and overall Monsterverse franchise has with both Godzilla and Kong. Historians have theorized that the reason why the Colosseum is called the Colosseum in the first place is because of a giant statue depicting the Roman Emperor Nero as a sun god that was placed not far from the Colosseum itself. This statue became known as the Colossus Solus, and since this Colossus Solus statue was so close to the giant amphitheater, the amphitheater was renamed to the Colosseum after this giant sun deity statue. So, Godzilla sleeping like a cat inside of this Colosseum feels like it was meant to tease Godzilla's inevitable rise as Earth's new solar titan king after he would defeat and absorb the pink solar energies that powered the serpent titan Tiamat, the previous holder of that title. Now, if you watched any of my previous Monsterverse breakdowns on this channel, you'll likely be familiar with how I've been analyzing the colors of the energies of Legendary's Monsterverse and tying those colors to the overall themes at the core of this universe. And ever since Kong's introduction in 2017's Kong Skull Island, Kong has been purposely themed around Earth's yellowy orange sun, with Kong in that movie being a clear metaphor for the wax-melting sun of the Icarus myth. Because of that theme, Kong Skull Island both starts and ends with zoom-ins on eyeballs that turn into solar eclipses, with the solar eclipse that we see in the opening credits of A New Empire being a reused asset from Kong Skull Island. And later on, we learn that the reason why Godzilla switches from glowing blue to glowing pink in this movie is due to Godzilla seeking to power up by absorbing the crazy amounts of solar energy that Tiamat had been absorbing for God knows how long, turning Godzilla from a creature powered from the same blue power source that courses through the Earth of the Hollow Realm to one that is now enhanced by the Earth's solar power, making Godzilla Earth's newest monster god king of the sun. So Godzilla and Kong both becoming sun-themed titans in this film was meant to symbolize their eventual team-up and truce that they would end up forming under the hot Egyptian sun in front of the Sphinx, with the Sphinx itself also being a symbol affiliated with the sun god Hor-Em-Akhet. I mean, even the Titan Queen Mothra is reborn like a phoenix herself in a brilliant yellow solar glow, whereas the Mothra that we were introduced to in King of the Monsters glowed a similar blue to the blue energy source of the Hollow Earth. So even this new Mothra in this movie has become a solar energy being. Like, this sun theme is obviously meant to symbolize how Godzilla, Kong, and Mothra have all agreed to team up to protect humanity's solar-powered realm. So the colors yellow, orange, and pink seem to be directly tied to solar energy power in Legendary's Monsterverse, with pink being added in this movie due to pink being one of Adam Wingard's favorite colors. But anyways, the reason why Godzilla was in Rome in the first place is to finally deal with the long-legged Titanus Scylla, who made their first appearance in 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters when King Ghidorah summoned all the Titans to him after defeating Godzilla, and would appear later to bow down to Godzilla in fear at the end of that film. But it appears that Scylla's allegiance to Godzilla was disingenuous, which eventually leads Godzilla to covering himself in Scylla's guts in Rome, with that moment being a clear parallel to Kong covering himself in Wart Dog guts at the start of the film. And after Godzilla deals with Scylla, he runs around the planet trying to power himself up by sucking up as much energy as he can, arriving in France to slurp up the energy that they were storing in their nuclear facilities before heading to the Arctic Ocean to find the serpent Tiamat's secret lair, a lair that had been absorbing the radiation from Earth's sun for millennia due to its location on the globe. This serpent titan Tiamat was actually briefly referenced in 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters when one of the Monarch agents at Monarch's Mothra monitoring station mentions how a titan at Stone Mountain's Outpost 53 was on their way to pledge their loyalty to King Ghidorah, with Stone Mountain, Georgia being Tiamat's old resting place before navigating to the Arctic. And right after the events of King of the Monsters, Godzilla is actually jumped by Tiamat while Godzilla was just chilling in one of his many resting spots around the world. But Tiamat would of course get his ass beat and chased away by Godzilla, as detailed in the official Godzilla vs. Kong prequel comic, Godzilla Dominion. But to return the favor, Godzilla then jumps Tiamat at his crib and uses his atomic breath to obliterate Tiamat Tiamat from this plane of existence before moving into Tiamat's house and putting himself in some sort of mini hibernation. But this is not your normal Godzilla nap. Oh no, this is a nap that Godzilla is using to purposely transform and evolve himself. During this nap, the Godzilla Kong novelization reveals that Godzilla straight up duplicated Tiamat's DNA and physically evolved because of that DNA duplication, which is absolutely nuts. But anyways, Kong eventually arrives in Barbados, surprising absolutely everyone at Monarch. But luckily, your boy Trapper is here to give Kong the much needed dental relief that he's been craving, with Trapper's first on-screen appearance of the movie being set to 1977's I Gotcha by Greenflow, which was an introduction that actually convinced Dan Stevens to take the role as Trapper when Adam Wingard pitched the scene to him. Dan Stevens actually based a lot of his performance as Trapper in this movie on Jack Burton from 1986's Big Trouble in Little China, as well as Jack Colton from 1984's Romancing the Stone. After Kong gets his mouth upgraded with some new gear, Dr. Andrews brings Gia, Bernie, Trapper, and some miserable grumpy bitch named Mikhail down through Monarch's Vile Vortex access point into the Hollow Earth. As they travel at insane speeds through these tunnels, swirls of blue and pink lights fly about in their view, symbolizing how blue Hollow Earth energy and pink solar energy appear to travel between these realms somehow, which would make sense considering what Dr. Andrews says at her TED Talk at the beginning of the film about Hollow Earth and the surface world not being two worlds, but one singular Earth with connecting ecosystems. When the Hollow Earth aerial vehicle finally arrives to the Hollow Earth, the gang fly by these giant green crystals, with these green crystals that populate the realm actually being the Hollow Earth's main light sources, which explains why it looks like it's always sunny in Kongadelphia. These green crystals also seem to be tied to the concept of gravity in this universe, with the Iwi tribe native to the Hollow Earth using these crystals to manipulate gravity in order to move super heavy objects around and whatnot. The squad of humans then split up with Kong and head to Monarch Hollow Earth Outpost 1, which got absolutely wrecked by Scar King and his great ape homies, leaving his signature red handprint behind to presumably mark his territory. We got a tease of Scar King's presence within the Hollow Earth in Godzilla vs. Kong when Kong sees one of these red handprints on the door to the Hollow Earth throne room. On the Kong side of things, Kong eventually finds a hole that leads him to the subterranean realm of the Hollow Earth, where he meets Suko pretty much immediately upon arriving. When a smoke-covered Suko approaches Kong, the smoke around him makes his shadow appear bigger and longer than it actually is before that shadow reveals how tiny Suko actually is in comparison to Kong. That moment feels like it could be Adam Wingard teasing a possible link between the small and feisty Suko and the tall and bloodthirsty Scar King, with the Scar King possibly being Suko's biological father, as hinted by the Scar King's multiple partners and babies that we see around his throne room. Actually, Suko's name is never said at any time throughout this movie, and the general public would not really know Suko's name at all if it wasn't for the promotional material and toys for A New Empire. Suko, whose name feels like a slight nod to Kiko, the son of Kong from 1933's Son of Kong, is actually the third mini Kong to appear in a King Kong movie, with Baby Kong from 1986's King Kong Lives being the second. Because of Suko's introduction and crucial involvement in this movie, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire was actually under the working title Son of Kong before the official title was revealed. And even though Wingard isn't going to be directing whatever sequel comes after this movie, it definitely feels like it was him and Legendary's intention on making Suko an essential part of the Kong narrative to come in the future, especially since Suko's name literally means essential or necessary child in Japanese. So we could actually end up seeing Suko taking up the mantle of the King of the Kongs at some point in Legendary's future, because much like we learned with the international tragedy that was Harambe's death, apes don't go poo-poo pee-pee and hoo-hoo-hee-hee forever, man. One day, King Kong will have to go to the big Donkey Kong country in the sky, leaving Diddy Kong here to keep tabs over his Kong dynasty. Which of course then leads us to the Monsterverse movie event, Avengers Kong Dynasty, with Mini Kong the Conqueror. But anyways, immediately after meeting Suko, Kong is jumped by a bunch of Scar King's loyal great ape soldiers, each bearing a red mark on their chest to show their allegiance to their abusive king. At the very end of whooping the asses of all of these overgrown gorilla goons, Kong uses his strong arm and impeccable aiming skills to perfectly bonk a fleeing great ape on the head with a rock. This isn't the first time we've seen Kong's incredible rock-throwing skills, as we would see him bonk a giant sea serpent on the head with a perfect long-distance rock throw in 1967's King Kong Escapes. We get another reference to that moment from King Kong Escapes when, not long after Kong forces Zuko to lead him to the rest of his people, Kong is forced to fight a sea serpent called a drowned viper when he was caught by surprise while bathing. Don't you hate it when you're taking a shower and a snake approaches you from behind? I thought this was a Hollow Earth, man, not the average American prison. But anyways, this attack by the drowned viper happens around the same time Godzilla is fighting the serpent Tiamat. Another way this movie attempts to sync and parallel the actions of both of these Titan heroes throughout the film. When Kong and Zuko finally arrive at the Great Apes' volcanic home of slavery and abuse, Kong immediately goes to help apes being bullied by one of the Scar King's men by kicking some of their asses, showing just how much more compassionate Kong is towards other kaiju like him due to him having been alone for so long and craving any type of Kong connection. So when Kong finally meets people like him and sees that they're being hurt, Kong has no choice but to spring into action to protect them and his overall dream. Adam Wingard purposely did this in order to accentuate just how much Kong is supposed to represent the best qualities of humanity, while the Scar King embodies the worst, most violent, and ruthless parts of humanity. Kong rudely interrupting the workflow of the Scar King's slaves leads Scar King to confront Kong himself. Even though Kong towers over Scar King at 337 feet tall, whereas Scar King stands at a mere 318 feet tall, like some type of Smurf. But to make up for their height difference, the Scar King has luckily wrapped his body with the spine of a warbat, which he uses in combat to beat and slice his enemies, as well as yoink his enemies to him like Scorpion does to his opponents, with Adam Wingard himself even confirming that he took a lot of inspiration from video games in order to craft his fight scenes. But anyways, after Kong bests the Scar King in a 1v1, Scar King decides to wuss out by using a strange crystal to painfully summon the Frost Titan Shimo from behind a wall of volcanic lava and forces Shimo to blast Kong with her ice breath. But hey, some fun facts about Shimo. Shimo is actually a she, yo, with this female Titan's name actually meaning frost in Japanese, which is incredibly fitting considering her frigid power set. A power set that is implied to be responsible for the freezing of King Ghidorah a long time ago, a freezing that we see get undone in Godzilla King of the Monsters. In order to design Shimo, the production referenced the natural looks and movements of polar bears, Komodo dragons, and chameleons. Kong, using the same defense tactic he used against Godzilla in the previous film, tries to use the absorptive qualities of the Godzilla scale on his axe to absorb the energies from this blast, but that decision ends up severely damaging Kong's hands with a nasty case of frostbite, forcing Kong to flee the Scar King's lair and return to the upper levels of the Hollow Earth. And as Kong is trying to evade capture by Scar King's army, Kong leads them into various traps that he built and placed throughout the Hollow Earth, showing just how incredibly smart and tactical Kong has evolved to become over time. When one of Kong's traps fails to activate, however, it's Kong's new little buddy Zuko who activates the trap and saves Kong from getting his ass beat, with Zuko beating his chest like Kong does in order to symbolize his new loyalty to his new potential savior of the Great Ape race. While this is all happening, Gia eventually helps lead the group of humans to the Hollow Earth Iwi tribe, using her special connection with them. And when the group gets close to the settlement, Trapper notices a carving of the Titan Mothra on a nearby wall, a carving that closely matches that of the one Emma and Maddie Russell discovered in China in King of the Monsters, very much implying that the Iwi people might have populated the upper surface of the world with a lot bigger numbers at one point in the past, especially since later on we discover how the Iwi of the Hollow Earth have mastered the manipulation of gravity to move incredibly massive objects with ease, a mastery that seems to imply that the Iwi might have helped the ancient Egyptians build the pyramids themselves, as Iwi culture seems to be heavily pyramid based due to the triangular shape of their crystallized power sources. After Gia's group of humans are surprised by a group of camouflage Iwi, much like how Conrad and Weaver's group of humans were surprised by the Iwi in Kong Skull Island, they lead Gia and her group towards a massive glowing pyramid with a big ass staircase, with the base of that pyramid glowing blue on the left and yellow on the right to symbolize both the Hollow Earth and Human Earth's main energy sources. Around these pyramids are a bunch of undocumented vile vortexes that could lead anywhere on the surface of the planet Earth, a possible allusion towards a potential plot point in a potential sequel to this movie. At one point during the film, Trapper confronts Bernie about his obsession with chasing internet clout by being the first to film and document life on the Hollow Earth for the general public, with Trapper warning him that humanity's tendency to destroy and conquer could completely destroy the Iwi's way of life and radically alter the entire mystical Hollow Earth for the worst. I mean, with Apex Cybernetics paving the way in Godzilla vs. Kong, it seems like it's only inevitable that the human forces of the surface world eventually attempt a proper invasion of the Hollow Earth for land and radioactive resources. So these vile vortexes around this Iwi tribe could very well be the entry point human parties need in order to catch the Iwi by surprise and wipe them out for their land, much like what happened with the Native Americans when the humans of the East discovered the New World. But anyways, when Gia and the group are led inside of this giant pyramid structure, the Iwi Queen shows them a giant glowing white crystal at the center, with that crystal being the source of the strange dreams Gia's been receiving, as well as the weird readings Monarch has been picking up. Knowing that Scar King's ascent to the surface was inevitable, the Iwi used this crystal in order to summon both Gia and Godzilla to their aid, with this crystal somehow being able to interface with biological brains and manipulate them to action, which is not so different from the Scar King's Whiplash crystal that he uses to control Shimo. Like, I honestly bet that there's some type of connection there between these two crystals that might be revealed in a potential sequel. But after the gang learns of this Iwi prophecy, Gia discovers that she is destined to become the Skull Island native that would restore humanity's guardian Queen Mothra to the worlds after she was destroyed in Godzilla King of the Monsters, which Gia does by ascending the giant Iwi pyramid and generating some type of mysterious yellow light that brings Mothra back in the game, just in time to serve as a peacemaker between Godzilla and Kong in Cairo, Egypt, as well as the one to officially assemble the greatest team-up of Sun God Guardians the world has ever seen, with Gia being the representative for humanity atop the Sphinx solar entity. Because, just like I theorized in my Godzilla X Kong trailer breakdown videos, Gia is actually Legendary's version of the Shobijin, who were originally two telepathic twins that served as priestesses for Mothra that made their debut in 1961's Mothra film. Because of their special connection to Mothra, the Shobijin were the only ones capable of communicating Mothra's will to humanity, much like Gia is in this movie. And since the word Shobijin literally means small beauties, it seems like Adam Wingard always intended this fate for Gia when he introduced her in Godzilla vs. Kong, as Gia's name straight up means beautiful, making the young Gia a small beauty. But anyways, after a zero-gravity fight that ultimately failed to stop the Scar King and his forces from accessing one of the vile vortexes above the Iwi's territory, the Titans all emerge in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, to have their final battle as Brazil's Christ the Redeemer statue gets a front row seat. But the only Redeemers here are the Sun God Squad. But after this Sun God Squad managed to free Shimo from Scar King's control, Shimo turns against her master and freezes him solid before Kong ultimately ends up being the one to deliver the shattering killing blow to the Scar King, officially earning his title as King Kong of the Hollow Earth, and starting his new empire with Prince Zuko as his adopted son, and Shimo as his new pet homie alongside Doug, leaving the door wide open for anything to happen in a sequel. But like I said before, I definitely feel like the Hollow Earth is going to be invaded by humans very, very soon. But anyways, before we wrap up this video, let us go into the different creatures that we actually run into during this movie, starting with the leaf wings that appear at the very beginning of the film to 1963's Welcome to My World by Jim Reeves. We were first introduced to leaf wings in Kong Skull Island as part of the wildlife of Kong's home island. They were actually that predatory bird species that yoinked that Landsat nerd from the gray fox and ripped that motherfucker in half like he was wet toilet paper. Leaf wings have appeared a number of times throughout the Monsterverse, including at the end of Godzilla King of the Monsters right after Godzilla kills King Ghidorah, as well as inside of Monarch's Skull Island Biodome in Godzilla vs. Kong. When overseeing the design for the leaf wings for Kong Skull Island, the director of that film, Jordan Vaught Roberts, specifically asked the VFX team to create a fucked up stingray with a bayonet for a face, end quote. And that's exactly what these leaf wings are. But anyways, the creatures that chase Kong at the start of the movie are actually called wart dogs, which are a new Titan species making their debut in this movie. In order to create the movement for these animated creatures, the movie copied the body movements of hyenas, wolves, and African painted dogs. And the design of the wart dogs, according to art director Nick Lloyd, were an amalgamation of several different animal parts. For the claws, they used eagle talons, then hyenas with cataracts for the eyeballs, the hide of diseased water buffalo for the hide, and the scars of sick dogs. And a monster that would absolutely prank the shit out of Kong by mimicking his Kong call is a creature appropriately called a parrot frog, with that moment being the creature's first appearance in Legendary's Monsterverse. A New Empire also features the debut of the electrifying verticine monsters of the Hollow Earth, a group of flying monsters that naturally emit bioelectricity when threatened. The quick-thinking Trapper would utilize utilize these electric birds against the Scar King and Shimo in the third act of the movie. And my favorite monster in this movie is of course the tree mimic, mostly because it did us the favor of eating that insufferable, bloodthirsty psychopath of a Monarch pilot that was always clearly going to die first due to him not being on the movie's poster or any of the promo material. Who is this guy? I don't know, so him becoming future tree mimic poop was more than fine with me. The tree mimic is the newest Monsterverse monster that we see use trees and the natural environment as camouflage, following the bramble boar from Monarch Legacy of Monsters, a warthog-looking titan whose skin matches that of natural forest bramble. Then we get another new creature called a drowned viper that we see when one of them tries to attack and drown Kong, when Kong and Zuko were just trying to have a nice relaxing swim as father and kidnapped son. Having Kong fight one of these drowned vipers feels like another nod to 1967's King Kong Escapes, when Kong fights a giant sea serpent in order to protect a group of humans. And around 49 minutes into the movie, we can actually witness some beastly warbats feasting on some hellhawks as Kong and Zuko observe the aerial carnage overhead. A warbat almost got the best of Kong when he first arrived to the Hollow Earth in Godzilla vs. Kong. But since Kong is the HBIC of the HE, Kong ended up ripping off that warbat's head clean off his body and chomping on him a little bit. And not long after that, Kong and his human homies would be attacked by a flock of hellhawks that descended upon them from the roof of the Hollow Earth throne room. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this ultimate breakdown of all the recent Godzilla films. You guys are awesome. You guys can follow me at Mastertainment on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow the Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube. And when you do, hit that notification bell so you can get notifications for every time we upload a video. But yes, you guys are awesome. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.